So we've stepped into an air-conditioned, cool corridor. What do you reckon the air quality's like in here?
Well, the air quality we know from our measurements is very similar to what's happening outside in terms of the smaller particles. The larger particles, somewhat less in concentration, but we know that the very fine particles occur inside with the same concentration as outdoors.
And is that worse in old houses that are leakier and draftier?
To a certain extent, because the thing is that even the new houses which have a higher air tightness, they still have to be ventilated from the outside. And it's interesting that in Australia, the advice that they're actually giving to the Australians is to stay inside while the bushfires are happening, and particularly to maybe go to a shopping centre or a building which has got a filtered air intake. So there is an opportunity to have the very fine particles to be filtered out of the air, and so they might be better protected.
Oh, okay. If in doubt, go shopping.
Yes, definitely.
There's some air quality advice, people. So where have we come to?
We have come to the area where we have our particle accelerator, and this is the control room where we control the experiments or the measurements that we have for the individual filters.
It's full of machines that look quite complicated.
Yes. Well, the accelerator was actually installed here in the early 1960s, but it's been updated all over that time, so it's still very functional and works well for us.
So you mentioned outdoors that you collect filters, so you're basically filtering the air at a site and then you're bringing those filters back here to analyse?
Yeah, that's right. And so we put them in front of the beam from the accelerator, and we use that particle beam to give us the elemental concentrations in those filters.
Can you explain that a bit more to me?
The particle beam, as it impacts onto the air pollution particles, there's all sorts of interactions that happen, like including X-rays, gamma rays, and scattered particles, and we can use each of those interactions to determine the composition, the elemental composition, and the concentration of each of those elements on the filter. And then Perry, he's the chemist, he does source apportionment on those concentrations and turns those concentrations into what the sources are.
Yeah, that's right. So from that data, we can then provide the advice to the regional councils of what the biggest bang for their buck in terms of policy improvements for air quality.
So are we seeing any improvements in air quality? Let's just go back to that outside air quality again.
We are actually, yeah. We have a long-term study with Auckland Council that's been going for about 14 years now, and we can see from that long-term data that particles from motor vehicles, for instance, is coming down from tailpipe emissions. That's due to engine technology improvements and emission improvements, tailpipe improvements for cars, so that's really improved over the last 10 years.
And that's despite the fact that the number of vehicles is going up?
That's right, yeah. So even though the number of vehicles in New Zealand still continues to rise, we're almost at one light-duty vehicle for every man, woman and child at the moment. But we can see it starting to plateau now as that number of vehicles starts to outweigh those technology improvements.
But most of that improvement is coming for the diesel vehicles rather than the petrol ones?
That's right. Petrol vehicles don't actually produce very many particles because of the type of combustion engine they are.
Thanks, Perry. That was Perry Davey, and we also heard from Bill Trompeter, and they are both with GNS Science. I'm Alison Balance, and you can find Our Changing World and lots of other RNZ podcasts on the podcast page at rnz.co.nz. Bye for now. Kia pai tō rā.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. I'm Lisa Owen and welcome to this Checkpoint special. We're with you through until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown. There are 50 new confirmed or probable cases of Covid-19, bringing the total to 205. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College. Border security will be stepped up. Everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened. Those displaying symptoms of Covid-19 will go direct to an isolation facility. The Tokyo Olympics have been postponed until 2021. Countdown's Kiri Hannafin will join us after 5 this evening. The Prime Minister will be with us live at around 5:20. Brett O'Reilly from the Employers and Manufacturers Association will be live before 6, and we'll hear from the mayors of our 4 major cities after 6.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora. At 4. Kia ora, ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. The government is introducing tougher measures for New Zealanders entering the country, including placing some people into quarantine at an approved facility. Every New Zealander entering the country will be screened, and anyone displaying symptoms will be tested and will be put into an approved isolation facility. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says if someone is not symptomatic but has no plan or ability to go into isolation, they will also be placed in an approved facility.
These measures are tough, but reflect the higher risk these New Zealanders pose through no fault of their own. I know they'll be as keen as we all are to keep other New Zealanders safe, and then these are the measures we must take to ensure.
Jacinda Ardern says those who do have an appropriate isolation plan will be checked by the police. They will be fined and quarantined if they are not following requirements. Cases of Covid-19 will continue to rise for at least 10 days, even after the country moves into level 4 lockdown at midnight. The number of cases has doubled to 205 in the past 2 days. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says more cases will continue to be reported as people will have been infected before the lockdown.
The infections we are finding today and over the coming week to 10 days are people who have been infected before today. So the numbers will continue to increase before they turn around. That turnaround will happen if all New Zealanders do what is being asked of them. That is, to stay at home, to break the chain and save lives.
Ashley Bloomfield says 100 people arriving at Auckland Airport were assessed, of whom 35 were tested and 8 were confirmed to have the virus. Germans and New Zealanders alike are vying to get on Mercy flights to Germany arranged by its government. Germany plans to start evacuating residents and citizens from Auckland and Christchurch starting Friday as part of a global effort to get people home. New Zealander Troy Small is stuck in Hamilton for the time being, but he says he's desperate to get back to his other home and his wife in Germany.
I've managed to just squeak into that window where everything's gone pear-shaped, so we're stuck on opposite sides of the planet and nobody knows what tomorrow's going to bring. So it's just, you got to deal with it each day.
Troy Small says he's waiting to hear back from the German embassy on whether he will be allowed on any flight out. AUT says a staff member has apologised for sharing a false post claiming people posing as government officials were robbing people. The post, which was emailed and published on social media, claimed that groups disguised as official Covid-19 sanitation units had already robbed many homes. It urged people not to open their doors and to share the post widely. AUT says the staff member was well-intentioned and has acknowledged sharing it was an error. The Dow Jones has recorded its biggest daily percentage gain in almost 90 years, closing up more than 11%. Asian and European markets also recorded big gains, although they are still down on where they were before the coronavirus outbreak. The BBC's Michelle Fleury has more.
This is a stunning turnaround from the markets, from sharp declines yesterday to record performance here by the Dow, and also a strong performance by the S&P 500, up 9%, its biggest gain since 2008. Investors are essentially hopeful that Congress can get this stimulus package done. But here's the thing, we have seen since the coronavirus started to impact the markets and spread fear across Wall Street, we've seen these big rises only for them to quickly wash out again.
Michelle Fleury reporting the New Zealand share market is currently up almost 3%. Teddy bears are popping up in home windows across the country to give children something to look forward to on their neighbourhood walks during the lockdown. The bear hunt movement is taking off here after proving popular overseas. A Facebook page, We're Not Scared, NZ Bear Hunt, has been set up to encourage people to place a teddy bear where it can be seen from the street. Organisers say they have had an overwhelmingly positive response. That's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. New Zealand is moving to alert level 4 at 11:59 tonight. This will save lives. You must stay home. Where you stay tonight is where you must stay from now on. You must only be in physical contact with those you are living with. It is likely level 4 will stay in place for a number of weeks. Remember, what you do now will affect all of us. Sticking to the rules matters. Stay home. Save lives. Find out more at covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Taumaranui. Cloudy periods with isolated showers. Showers clearing Whanganui and Manawatu tomorrow. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine but isolated showers about East Cape early tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated showers developing, turning to rain in Wellington tonight. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago. Fine with some high cloud today. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon and evening with heavy falls possible in Canterbury and Otago. For Bulla and Westland, isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy, clearing Westland later in the day. Fiordland and Southland, light showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland. Mainly fine with high cloud elsewhere. Showers becoming widespread and frequent tomorrow morning, easing tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands, often cloudy, a few showers today. RNZ National, it's 6 minutes past 4.
Thanks, Susanna. Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Owen and welcome to Checkpoint here on RNZ National. Stay at home, break the chain, save lives. The words of the Prime Minister this afternoon. We're with you through until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown. Today's vital numbers: 50 new confirmed or probable cases of Covid-19, bringing the total to 205. Border security will be stepped up. Everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened. Those displaying symptoms of Covid-19 will be placed in an isolation facility. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College. All students and staff from the school should already be in isolation. 4 cases are now regarded as community transmission, meaning health authorities don't know how they contracted it. The good news: 23 of the 205 people are fully recovered. 6 are in hospital and none have needed ICU care. 1,400 tests were processed yesterday and that's almost 10,000 tests in total. The Tokyo Olympics have been postponed until 2021. Over the next 3 hours, we'll tell you what essential services will be open over the next 4 weeks. The Prime Minister will join us live at 5:20 tonight and the mayors of our main cities will join us after 6. But first, let's go to our gallery where our political editor Jane Patterson joins us live. Jane, the Prime Minister has outlined some new, tougher rules around our borders. What do we know?
One of the greatest risks at the moment coming from overseas, returning New Zealanders. Now, of course, the borders have been closed to non-citizens and permanent residents, but there are still potentially thousands of New Zealanders still out in other countries, and the government has not been able to put a very specific figure on it, but it is in the number of thousands. Now, obviously, because they are still in countries that have outbreaks or could have been exposed, coming back here poses a massive risk. So what they are going to do, anyone arriving at the border, and if they will be screened, if they have symptoms, they will be tested and quarantined immediately. And the government has set up basically hotels or motel rooms close to airports. They will be using those to be able to put people in there if they are being tested, and also if they can't demonstrate very clearly that they have somewhere to go and that they have a self-isolation plan. Now, for those New Zealanders who come through who don't have symptoms and who have a plan, they will be able to go home, but they will be checked on regularly by the police, and the Prime Minister has said that if they are found to be breaching the rules, they will be fined and quarantined.
Also today, Jane, there were, special powers and a national state of emergency declared. What does that actually mean?
It basically means that the government now has unlimited powers across the justice system, across the health, welfare, tax, finance, you name it. Any portfolio or area where the government has authority, they can now pretty much do what they like in terms of the response to COVID-19. Now, we have the opposition fully backing those moves today, saying this is extraordinary powers to give to a government, but they are justified in these circumstances. Now, the state of emergency was declared at 12:21. There's also an epidemic notice, and both of these are in place place for a number of months, but can be adjusted accordingly. So they are not in perpetuity. They do have a time limit on them, but of course they'd be reviewed. So we've got our Parliament sitting for a very special sitting this afternoon. We had a very skeleton staff or presence of MPs dotted around the debating chamber. They declared the state of emergency, they issued the epidemic notice, and now they're working their way through legislation to give them the tools or the legislative authority they need. In particular, that massive financial support package had to go through the House. That has happened. So the Prime Minister saying late this afternoon that the government now has all the tools and all the legislative authority it needs to go into this month-long lockdown.
And I suppose you can have all the tools in the world, but if people do not play their part, we're still going to have a problem. So Sarah Stewart-Black and the Prime Minister and all those others in the main control group from the government reiterating today that they will take a tough line. What does that mean?
Well, the police and military under these powers will be able to keep order. If there are gatherings of people, for example, they will be able to disperse that. They will be asking people out and about, what are you doing? Are you going to the supermarket? Do you have a good reason for being here? Essential services will have letters and ID cards so that they, going about their business, will be able to present that and show why they are out and about. But also the Prime Minister and Sarah Stewart-Black, the Civil Defence Controller, said, don't be alarmed by this. The police and military, seeing them on New Zealand streets, not the police, but the military, is incredibly unusual and might be quite disquieting for some New Zealanders. But both reiterating they are there to help, to treat them like that. Don't treat it as though they are here in opposition or doing anything that the government doesn't want them to do. The other messaging that became much more pointed today, if it hasn't been already, stay home. Over the last couple of days, we've had lots of scenarios, and as journalists and other people, we have like lots of what ifs. What if I want to do this? Can I go to the playground? All sorts of different scenarios. The Prime Minister and officials are now basically saying, let's not go to those scenarios, stay at home. So in the last couple of days, they've been talking about getting fresh air and going for walks. That message became so important today. Stay home. Don't think about going fishing or hunting or ways that you can get out and about. You need to stay home. You need to get fresh air close to your own home. And if you come across people when you're out walking, stay away. Don't talk to them. Distance yourself and get home. A very, very clear and direct message as we prepare for that midnight lockdown.
Thank you, Jane. That's Jane Patterson, our political editor, joining us live from Parliament. As the nation prepares for lockdown, Christchurch's leaders say their city is prepared. Over the past 10 years, Christchurch has dealt with its fair share of crisis, from earthquakes, Port Hills fires, the March 15 terror attacks, flooding and a gas explosion. While COVID-19 has a global impact, some Cantabrians say their past experience will help them get through. Alicia Foon reports.
This is not the first time Christchurch has dealt with a crisis, and as the country prepares to hunker down, city leaders are sharing messages of support. Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says the city is already well connected because of past tragedies the region has been forced to face.
I think because we have been through traumatic experiences before, we are much better prepared as a city, than we ever were. We're better prepared in terms of the connections that have been made, the residents' social media pages that have been set up. Some of them date back to when the earthquakes happened.
Betty Chapman has been supporting hundreds of seniors in Christchurch through a community group in the city's east for the last 18 years. She says now that the elderly won't be able to rely on meeting face-to-face in social groups like hers, it's up to friends and family to pick up the phone.
In the last 10 years since the earthquake, we've used humour and positivity all the time, just to keep them on top of things, maintain the momentum by being positive, focused, use humour a lot and make them laugh.
There has been a growing demand for mental health services in Canterbury since the earthquakes, worsened by tragedies such as the mosque attacks and Port Hills fire. Sue Turner is the director of the Canterbury Mental Health campaign All Right. She says this pandemic might be the tipping point for some Cantabrians. However, help is always available.
What Cantabrians do know how to do is to reach out to other people and to look after themselves. I mean, we've learnt that over the last 9 years. But again, people are tired as well. For some people, it could be kind of the last straw. However, we believe that people will remain, in general, pretty resilient. And if people aren't coping, there's help.
Her advice to people feeling stressed or anxious is to ask for support from loved ones or call the free National Mental Health Hotline to speak to a trained counsellor. Meanwhile, Parenting Place family coach Joe Batts says some parents will be dealing with stressed and anxious children.
Give them a chance to flush out all of their worries. If we can help them name what they're feeling, like I'm feeling scared or I'm feeling worried about granddad or I'm feeling afraid that this is never going to end, if we can just listen to what it is that they're saying, then it means that they're not alone in it. I guess what our kids are really wanting to see from us is that we've got our calm and we can actually lend them a bit of that calm. They can borrow that from us.
Ms Dalzell says she's confident the country will overcome COVID-19.
Think back to our grandparents or my grandparents' generation who went through the Second World War. This is our generation's challenge, and it is going to be something that we are all going to have to come together without physically coming together, but in a spiritual sense, and we will get through this together.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says everyone in Aotearoa has a responsibility to check in on their friends, family and neighbours, so no one feels alone during this time. For Checkpoint, ko Elisha Foon tēnei.
The PM has advised people to act like they have COVID-19 if they feel confused about what they can or can't do during the 4-week lockdown. Now, to cover off some of your questions, we're joined by journalist Charlotte Cook from our Wellington studio. Hello, Charlotte. Lots of questions. Let's see if
many questions.
Yeah, let's get through as many of them as we can. What have you heard from frontline health workers about steps they are taking to protect their whānau? This listener wants to know.
And this has been a big question. So I've spoken to a GP. When they come home, they come straight into the garage. They take off all of their clothes, they put everything in a hot wash, and they go and take a shower before interacting with their whānau. Another nurse working in Wellington Hospital says she's choosing to sleep in the spare room in the sleep out and using separate shower and bathroom facilities. There is no official line as yet, but obviously do what works for you and your whānau. And obviously hand washing with soap and hot water is always effective.
Can family members provide childcare to essential workers if they are not living together? Now, this comes really into the fore because at midnight tonight, schools are not available from that point on to anyone.
Essential workers with children who need caregivers could select a buddy to join their self-isolated group who can then act as the caregiver. The important thing here is that that caregiver cannot have contacts outside of their own household. So think of yourself as a bubble. Their household is in contact with them, your caregiver is then in contact with your family, but there is no one additional added to this bubble. Think of it as that bubble and don't try and pop it.
Good point there. Another person says, how far can I travel by car? Ashburton to Christchurch to drop off groceries to elderly parents, 5 k's up the road to feed my horses, or 15 kilometres to a Tararua loop track.
Ultimately, the government wants people to stay home. Travel between towns won't be permitted. The advice is no playgrounds. Avoid any spaces or places where you'll touch surfaces or your child will touch surfaces that then can create a risk. Feeding the horses is a necessity of life, but police can and might stop you on your way or anyone moving about the country to see what they are doing. The message is quite clear: no mooching. So go to your essential services, avoid contact with everyone, and remember the 2 metre distance where you are near people. Obviously, just remember what Jacinda says. Treat your decisions like you have COVID-19. What would you expect people around you to do if they were infected?
So the specific element of that question about groceries to elderly parents, this is quite a distance they're trekking though, Ashburton to Christchurch. So,
yeah, I would say at this point, find a neighbour that's near them that is able to do the grocery run for them. That's too big of a trek to be going around, but no one wants elderly people to be left out and not looked after. So this is a perfect time to rally, keep your social distance. You're allowed to talk to people and engage with people, but it's the physical distancing. So someone in their neighbourhood could drop off the groceries at the front door, leave them there, knock on the door and run away. So there is no contact, but everyone is still getting fed.
Car repairs, this is another one that is featuring heavily in questions. Will garages remain open? What if you need a windscreen repair? What about your warrant?
Okay, so obviously you are going to try and be as least on the road as possible unless you were going to the supermarket or to, get healthcare or the pharmacy. But on the road, driver licensing will be closed during the lockdown, as will warranted fitnesses for non-essential workers. The Transport Agency is also working on giving essential workers the options for getting their cars certified during the lockdown. But a lot of these details are still being worked through. The government has had to act very fast to get this level 4 lockdown into process. So as these things are being worked through, I'm sure the information will become clearer for us.
Animals. Lots of people have animals. Will you be able to take your dog to the park?
Yes, you can take your dog to the park. You can take your dog for a walk. But again, pretend that you have COVID-19. Don't get close to anyone. Don't go cozying up with any other dog friends. Maintain your distance. Don't touch surfaces. Don't mooch around. Don't use your dog as an excuse to just kind of wander the streets. You are supposed to be home. We are in isolation. So don't try and find loopholes. This is a way that we can protect our country from an outbreak that could, kill thousands.
And from our South Island listeners, a lot are asking about firewood. Will they be able to get firewood delivered over the next month? Is it an essential service?
Things are obviously going to get colder as we get into winter. So this is something that is being looked at. It was raised today in the press conference. But for the purposes of safety and warmth, it's considered an essential service. But the Ministry for Business and Innovation is only just starting to look at that now. So that will be clarified.
Thanks, Charlotte. That's our reporter, Charlotte Cook, and we will address some of your other questions later on in the program, so still keep them coming. It is 22 minutes after 4 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. If you're just joining us, we're with you through until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59pm. Here's today's vital numbers. 50 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19, bringing the total to 205. Border security will be stepped up. Everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened. Those displaying symptoms of COVID-19 will be placed in an isolation facility. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College. All students and staff from the school should already be in isolation. 4 cases are now regarded as community transmission, meaning health authorities don't know how they contracted it. Border security will be stepped up with everyone arriving in New Zealand screened. Those displaying symptoms will be placed in isolation facilities. There is some good news amongst all of this. 23 of the 205 people with COVID-19 have fully recovered, and the people in hospital, well, none of them have needed ICU care. 1,400 tests were processed yesterday, and that's almost 10,000 tests in total. The Tokyo Olympics have been postponed until 2021. And over the next 3 hours, we will tell you all about what essential services will be open over the next 4 weeks. And the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, will join us live at 5:20 tonight. We'll also talk to the mayors of our main cities, and they'll be with us after 6 o'clock. How on earth do you stay competitive in a lockdown when your office is the swimming pool? 20-year-old swimmer Lewis Clareburt was to be our great hope in Tokyo. He's already shown what he's capable of, nabbing medals at both the World Champs and Gold Coast Commonwealth Games. Now with the Olympic Games on hold, what does training look like when you can't do laps and tumble turns? Lewis Clareburt joins me now. Lewis, this was going to be your first Olympics. How excited were you, and what now?
Yeah, it was super exciting. I was obviously super excited to get out there and compete this year, but obviously it's been postponed. So at the moment, I've pretty much been out of touch for the pool for the next 4 weeks. But I think I've set up a gym at home thanks to High Performance Sport New Zealand, and pretty much just trying to maintain fitness.
So, Lewis, there's nowhere you can swim. You don't have a pool at home. That's it for the pool for 4 weeks.
Yeah, pretty much. Unless I want to go in the ocean, I think that's it for me.
So how do you feel about that, and what advice have you been given about staying informed during that time?
Yeah, so we can't really do much about it, and the advice I've been given is just, obviously stay healthy and keep healthy and try not have too much contact with people. But the only thing I can do is just try keep fitness up and try and maintain my strength. But I think it's actually quite good for me because I think after this 4 weeks off, that'll be the last time I'll sort of be out of the pool, or that'll be my last time of having a break out of the pool until I guess I get to swim in Tokyo whenever it is.
So I imagine, as you say, totally disappointing, but does this at least give you some certainty, because there was such a question mark over the Olympics?
Yeah, it's such a relief, because for the last week or so I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to, get pool time if the Olympics weren't going to be postponed. So it's a relief for me now that I can sort of relax and say, 4 weeks out of the pool probably won't hurt me too much if the Olympics is next year.
So you're studying as well, aren't you? What are you studying for? Is it a Bachelor of Commerce that you've got underway?
Yeah, Bachelor of Commerce, majoring in Information Systems and Management.
So are you able to continue on with that?
So I think Victoria University has just said that they're going to cancel university for the next 5 weeks, but they've pretty much just told us to continue. I think we've got a few assignments due with that have been that we've already learnt the information that we need for them. So we've still got to hand those in for the time being, but all learning has been stopped.
Hey, and just before you go, what are your mates doing, other 20-year-olds? How are they approaching the lockdown?
I think a lot of people are getting into the gaming scene. One of the boys that is living with us at the moment, he's super happy. He's just got his PlayStation 4 delivered. But yeah, everyone's sort of jumping online, and there's a new app called House Party, I think, and everyone's sort of hopping on that and doing some online like Skype sort of thing.
A virtual party, Lewis.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, all the best for the next 4 weeks. Appreciate your time. That is Lewis Clareburt, who is one of our great swimmers, was supposed to be going to the Olympics this year, and that is postponed until next year. No access to the pool at home. He'll be working out in the gym. Food banks are bracing themselves for increased demand over the next 4 weeks as the country goes into lockdown. Some say they've already had more people coming in for help over the last few days, leaving their stocks seriously depleted. And they're having to juggle how they'll continue to provide services and restock while complying with the rules. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson has the story.
Lisa Napier helps keep some of Hamilton's community food pantries stocked up. She says the panic buying in supermarkets has been very stressful for people like her who are on a benefit or low income.
For the cheaper items, which I go for, like for instance a $2 pack of coffee, there was none. So the next option I had, which a lot of people are probably experiencing on a budget, was a coffee for $5. And it was like, okay, I can't do that.
And that's one of the reasons why food banks around the country are expecting increased demand over the next few weeks. Welfare and social service providers have been deemed essential services and will continue to operate during the lockdown period, albeit in a different way. From the end of today, Jerry Walker from the Salvation Army says all of their premises will be shut. But he says people in need will still be able to contact them by phone for help.
If it requires something like a food parcel, we will endeavour within the resource we currently have, and you'll appreciate that there's an increased demand on our food banks. We are starting to run low on food.
Jerry Walker says there has been a significant run on the organisation's food banks over the last 3 or 4 days, leaving their stocks seriously depleted. And he says they are anticipating extra demand for food parcels over the coming weeks.
We are working to replenish. We're talking with central government. We're talking with our donors and so forth to see about getting extra stock in. That takes time.
The Auckland City Missioner Chris Farrelly is expecting a similar spike in demand. Those in particular need are people who have lost their casual or low-wage jobs and don't get redundancy payments. Mr Farrelly says the mission is taking a careful look at its food stocks.
What we have in store
storage isn't large, and so we know we're going to need access to ongoing bulk food supplies into our distribution centre. So that's a piece of work underway at the moment.
Kevin Lamb from Age Concern Auckland says it's especially important to look out for older people. He says it's likely many more elderly people will feel isolated and lonely, and some will struggle to do basic things like getting groceries.
And I think this is then probably compounded by the fact that if you talk to some of the supermarkets now, there's a 2-week wait time for home deliveries. So what we're finding is that for a lot of older people, they really are now concerned. It's not so much that they can't afford food or have the means to buy it. They simply physically can't get it.
Kevin Lamb says they are working with supermarkets to see if older people can be prioritised for deliveries. But he's also urging people to help those in need in their communities by offering to pick up their groceries or dropping off a meal. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Sarah Robson, aho.
And you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. If you are just joining us, we're with you through until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59pm. Over the next 3 hours, we'll tell you what essential services will be open for the next 4 weeks, and the Prime Minister will join us live at 5:20. And the mayors of some of our biggest cities will also join us. That will be after 6. It is time now, though, for the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has a simple message for New Zealanders. Stay at home or risk lives and extending the lockdown period. The country is now in a state of national emergency ahead of the Level 4 lockdown beginning at midnight. There are now 205 confirmed coronavirus cases, and health authorities say cases will keep rising for at least 10 days. From 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, all returning New Zealanders will be screened and may be quarantined if they have COVID-19 or if they break isolation rules. Supermarkets and food retailers say the price of staples have not risen, despite some customers complaining that they have. There has been reasonable support for the first outing of the Reserve Bank's government bond buying program. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 5.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is a Checkpoint special as we head into tonight's lockdown. The wheels of justice are still turning in a handful of courts around the country, albeit much slower than normal. Courts have been deemed an essential service and will continue to run at a limited capacity using remote technology, even as we move into the 4th alert level during the pandemic. Lawyers, defendants and even court reporters are still showing up for hearings as measures to combat COVID-19 ramp up. But things are far from normal. Our court reporter Annika Smith has been in court today and she joins us now. Annika, what is it like down in court now compared to any other day?
Courthouses are much quieter than normal at the moment, given these new court protocols. At criminal callover this morning, criminal callovers happen once a week in the High Court at Auckland every Wednesday, and it's normally teeming with lawyers and really busy. It was really quiet today as pretty much all but one lawyer beamed in via or dialed in via teleconference, and the defendants appeared via AVL audiovisual link from prisons. The court reporters that did show up to court today, we were all separated into separate parts of the courtroom. So this is going to be the new norm for courthouses for the inevitable future. Looking ahead, things were much slower running by AVL, and we're already seeing the impacts of these new protocols and adjournments. Justice Fitzgerald, who presided over today's court callover, said that trial dates for matters that came up today would have to be set down now, otherwise they may not actually be heard until the end of 2021. So it's hard to know just how much of an impact this will have on the justice system as a whole, but things will be significantly shifted. There will be a significant backlog because of the way things are running now.
So are they just dealing with urgent cases, or do all of those run-of-the-mill cases that you normally see, hundreds of them, are they dealing with them as well?
Yeah, so they're prioritising they've stripped right back to just priority proceedings. So those are those that affect liberty of their individual, personal safety and well-being, and matters in which resolution is time critical. So courts have been deemed as an essential service. They'll keep running even as we go into the 4th alert level, but things will be very, very different. Jury trials have been suspended for 2 months, coronial inquests are not going ahead, and even sentencing hearings, so the last step in a case process, have been adjourned. We're supposed to have a big sentencing for a high-profile case today. That was adjourned off, so the victim's family in that matter, their whānau will have to wait for longer to see the resolution in that case. One case that will be in many people's minds is the terror trial in Christchurch in June. Now, as far as we've been told, it's still going ahead as normal, but obviously this is a really fast changing situation, and it's hard to see that far ahead exactly what things will look like in June. So we'll keep everyone posted as we get any updates on that particular case.
And what is the situation with prisons?
Prisons have been in effective lockdown since midnight Monday, banning or temporarily suspending visits and non-essential movements around the 19 prisons in the country. There are currently no COVID-19 cases, and corrections will really be hoping that it stays that way. About 34% of the prison population, we're told, is currently double bunked, and in a typically sort of confined space, there are obvious difficulties in prisoners following social distancing advice that we all are. Correction says it's encouraging inmates to maintain a 2-metre distance from each other, as well as washing their hands, coughing into elbows and talking to staff if they're unwell. It says the prison actually has really good facilities to isolate inmates who start to display COVID-19 symptoms, and they're now managing new prisoners by effectively isolating them for 14 days when they come in. And obviously prisoners over 17 years old and those vulnerable with underlying health conditions are being managed separately to the general population.
And how is the legal community reacting to all of this?
Lawyers seem to be taking it in their stride for the most part. We had a number of lawyers dial into the call over this morning, and things are pretty much as normal, although it is a bit strange to hear lawyers and not see them. I did speak to the president of the Criminal Bar Association, Len Anderson, this afternoon, and he said that it's disruptive but a really necessary step for the health of all court participants. He said one worry that lawyers have, or something that is weighing on their minds now, is they'd really like police not to make any arrests that aren't absolutely essential. Of course, if someone's arrested, they have to go to court, and thus starts this process of lawyers having to go to court. And I guess the worry is that if someone goes to court, it increases the risk with contact and things. So they're just hoping that the system will slow down as much as possible, so the caseload will slow down. That's their main concern, but for the most part, they're just adapting. Technology is the new norm.
Thank you for that update. That is our court reporter, Annika Smith. The Royal College of GPs is calling for the rationing of data and phone calls. Phone and internet traffic has ramped up this week as people spend more time at home. Vodafone says it's seen a 70% increase in calls and a 50% increase in mobile data usage. GPs say this is overloading the system and making it harder for patients to contact them and for doctors to reach out to patients. Conan Young has the story.
Streaming of movies and games may be seen by some as an essential service when they can't leave the house. But the head of the Royal College, Wellington GP, Dr Samantha Merton, says the increased demand this is placing on the system is making it difficult for doctors to contact patients online.
We're frontline healthcare, and so as an essential service we'd expect the traffic and the capacity to be diverted to health-related stuff, rather than people using it at home or playing the games or whatever else it is.
Dr Merton says the increased need to deal with patients remotely in order to reduce the spread of COVID-19 means the use of online portals to message them and prescribe medicines is now more important than ever.
One of our portals yesterday was struggling a bit, just trying to get referrals done and sending messages out to patients. So suddenly everyone's realised how much day-to-day work we do, that if you convert it to electronic, it is a completely different ballgame from, we might just need a little bit of extra here.
Samantha Merton says the most common means of contacting a GP is over a mobile phone. But on Monday, the cell network was completely overloaded.
It's essential that people can get healthcare, and if they can't get their healthcare, they tend to go somewhere where they can find it for free, and that's in a hospital, and a hospital is not the place for people to be at this time. We need to be having people having all their care as much as they can out in the community, and at the moment that means that we need to have phone access.
Both Spark and Vodafone told Checkpoint that overloaded phone and internet networks were an industry-wide problem and directed our inquiries to the industry body, the Telecommunications Forum. Its head, Jeff Thorne, says there's plenty of capacity in the broadband network to handle the extra demand, thanks mostly to the investment telcos put into infrastructure ahead of the decision to stream the Rugby World Cup.
It's not clear yet what the new norm will be, but what I would say is that, although there may be some times when that will slow down, there are very few networks that you can increase the demand in the same way that occurred over the last couple of days and have the network still stand up and operate, which is where we are at the moment, and that's due to the investment that the companies have made in their networks.
Jeff Thorne says the same goes for the ability of the system to handle the upsurge in calls. He says even if it was desirable to ration data and calls, doing so would be extremely difficult.
I mean, we do have priority for 111 calls, but to start changing the networks to give priority to other numbers, I mean, it would be difficult to find somewhere to start. In terms of rationing broadband access, well, that's really hard because you're actually getting down into the data that's been transmitted across the network to identify what it is and then allocate priorities to it. That becomes a real challenge.
Jeff Thorne says telcos will continue to reroute traffic to take pressure off broadband infrastructure when required. He's confident there is enough space on the network for doctors and those streaming movies at home. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conor tēnei.
A pregnant woman who is due to give birth during the nationwide shutdown says she fears being forced into having a home birth. 27-year-old Fele Tangaloa says she knows of other pregnant women who have been advised by maternity staff to consider giving birth at a birthing unit if they can, or at home if they're well enough to do so. Ministry of Health guidelines sent out to community midwives this week state that if a woman feels safe to do so, home birth is an option they could consider, and to avoid the hospital as much as possible. But Ms Tangaloa says her home isn't equipped for it and she's worried she may have no choice. Indira Stewart reports.
Fili Tangaloa is due to give birth to her third child in about 2 weeks during the nation's self-isolation period. She says she's trying not to panic.
I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. So usually I'm the type to leave things till the day I feel my contractions. But with the lockdown happening, everyone's panic buying, which is starting to make me feel somewhat of a panic. But it's just trying to remain calm and knowing that, you know, there are essentials out there. I just need to remain calm.
She plans to give birth at the hospital where she feels safest, but the ongoing uncertainty means she's worried about how different things will be in 2 weeks from now.
I did hear that they were trying to speak to pregnant women who were due soon about birthing from home, and that was causing a bit of anxiety for me, just because it's not our norm. My home would not be suitable for a place to birth at. Like, we don't have a bathtub, and just with my other kids, it's just not, I feel like, a safe and sacred space for me to be able to bring my third child into this world.
Dr Eva Neely is on the governance board for the College of Midwives and is a public health lecturer at Victoria University. She's started a support group on Facebook called Pregnancy and Birth During COVID and says many pregnant women will be feeling even more vulnerable right now. She's aware that staff on the ground are advising some women to carefully consider their birthing options during this time.
At the moment, the official government response is encouraging women still to choose, obviously, which of the options they feel most comfortable with. But obviously, as this progresses, it's important to keep an eye on the capacity that hospitals have and also to be aware of whether or not you would like to go into hospital. It's just, I guess, that the reasons not to go into hospital are a little bit elevated and more on everyone's radar than they normally would be. And I think, too, if we want to take off any pressure off the health system, to make sure that our DHBs do continue to support and staff the primary birthing units, because we also know that many women do not have a house that they're safe in to birth.
36-year-old Briar Hale is 27 weeks pregnant with her first child. She's decided to give birth at home, and she says she's relieved that the nation is going into lockdown.
I'm really glad that we've gone to level 4. I feel like, just on a personal level, relieved to be at home. And to be in isolation. I use public transport in Auckland as my way of getting to work. And that had started to become a little bit unnerving probably towards the end of last week.
As the number of COVID-19 cases continues to rise in New Zealand, she says she's glad to be having a home birth.
Just for our own personal comfort of not needing to go to a hospital where COVID may be present. Just the idea of travelling into, where it's all happening doesn't fill me with a great sense of calm.
Whili Tangaloa says she's nervous about contracting the virus in hospital, but would still rather give birth there than at home.
I'm nervous about birthing at home, and at the same time nervous about getting sick in the hospital, but weighing up the pros and the cons, just being at a facility with doctors and nurses, it would be the best place for me.
For Checkpoint, Indira Stewart.
It is 15 minutes away from 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. If you're just joining us, we're with you until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59pm. Today's vital numbers: 50 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19, bringing the total to 205. Border security will be stepped up. Everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened, and those displaying symptoms of COVID-19 will be placed in an isolation facility. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College, and 4 cases are now regarded as community transmission. There is some good news. 23 of the 205 people who have COVID-19 are now fully recovered. 6 are in hospital, but none have needed ICU care. 1,400 tests were processed yesterday. That brings the total number of tests processed to about 10,000. The Tokyo Olympics have been postponed until 2021. Up until 7 o'clock tonight, we'll keep you posted on what essential services are, what will be open over the next 4 weeks, and the Prime Minister will join us live at around 5:20 tonight. We'll also talk to mayors from our main cities. They will be with us after 6 o'clock. Germans and New Zealanders alike are vying to get on Mercy flights to Germany arranged by its government. The European country is one of the first to arrange evacuations for stranded citizens, as many parts of the world closed their borders to curb the spread of COVID-19. Mackenzie Smith reports.
Troy Small is stuck in Hamilton for the time being, but he's desperate to get back to his other home and his wife in Germany.
I'm currently in a queue, essentially, to hear back and to get some plans going.
He and other German residents or citizens are waiting to hear back from the German government about when an evacuation from New Zealand will take place. Germany plans to evacuate nearly 80,000 of its citizens stranded abroad. In New Zealand, the German embassy says the first return flights are expected to start from Auckland on Friday evening, with additional flights also leaving from Christchurch. According to Troy Small, everything is still up in the air.
I've managed to just squeak into that window where everything's gone pear-shaped. So, we're stuck on opposite sides of the planet and nobody knows what tomorrow's going to bring. So it's just, you got to deal with it each day.
2 German tourists are also trying to get on any outgoing flights. Susie Wimfeld and her friend Alina Stam have been in New Zealand for 2 weeks for what was supposed to be an 8-week tour of the country in a camper van. Ms Wimfeld says their commercial flights back home have been cancelled and they're relieved by the planned evacuation.
Really, really relieved, because we now know that we don't have to be here forever. It's also a question of money, of course, because we don't have unlimited money. So it's really good to know that we're not stuck here forever.
Another German tourist, Monica Blisse, is staying in Waihi Beach with her husband and their 2 young children. She says they're keen to get out, but the locals are very welcoming.
The people in Waihi are so friendly and helpful. Some of them offered help and gave us their numbers, and they said if we need something or if we end up on the street, we just should contact them and they will look how they could help us.
Other Germans in New Zealand aren't planning on going anywhere. Franziska Jack is living with her family in the Coromandel and thinks it's much safer here.
In Germany, the situation is much more severe than here at the moment. And I wouldn't be able to go outside with the girls as much as I can here.
Franziska Jack says her family's fridge is stocked for the next few days, but they're worried because the local supermarket is struggling to get supplies. For Checkpoint, Mackenzie Smith.
Air New Zealand increased its number of domestic flights today so as many people as possible can get home as the country goes into lockdown. From 11:59 tonight, only staff working in essential services will be able to fly. Despite dozens of cancellations, there have been more than 100 international flights arriving in New Zealand today, and some routes are set to continue so New Zealanders can come home. Our reporter Logan Church is outside Wellington Airport, well away from the terminal, and joins us now live. Logan, how busy is it looking there?
Hi Lisa, yes, well one of those planes you mentioned before by Air New Zealand has just landed, we understand, from Christchurch, and there have been plenty of flights around New Zealand domestically today. Just looking, we drove past the terminal earlier today and there were certainly lots of people still going in and out. Now you must remember that the airports will stay open during the lockdown period. They are considered an essential service. However, everyone that we saw were of course wearing masks, most trying to stay well away from each other. Also, many of the car parks, which are usually filled with cars, many are standing empty. So certainly a very different scene at the airport than what we're used to.
We're just watching now, actually, those of us who can see you, a plane touching down behind you there, which I'm wondering about international flights. Are they still coming in?
Yes, well, there certainly have been lots of international flights land today. Many cancelled, but just to give you an idea of the numbers based off the airport's websites, in Auckland they had more than 100 international flights land, and Wellington 7 and Christchurch 3. Now, international flights will continue during the lockdown period, but they will be they'll be far less frequent. And New Zealand says it will continue for at least the inevitable, the coming days at the very least. Flights to Australia and back, that to get New Zealanders in Australia home. But I have also been speaking to tourists in New Zealand today. I spoke just before to a couple from Belgium who, as of now, have absolutely no way to get home. They are stuck in New Zealand for the next 4 weeks. So those international flight numbers are expected to drop quite a bit over the coming days. The only way, of course, for passengers to, or there might be another plane going off behind me, the only domestic travel that will be allowed going forward will be essential workers, but also tourists who can get out of the country. So they will be allowed to fly domestically to fly out the international airports.
So what about people inside New Zealand who haven't been able to fly by 11:59 tonight?
Well, Air New Zealand has ramped up its flights today. They say that they have had bigger aircraft available and more aircraft available to fly around New Zealand today. Of course, many flying would notice that the aircraft are far more empty. That's because the airlines have put in strict social distancing rules on the plane. But as of 11:59 tonight, as I said, Lisa, only essential workers and cargo will be flown around New Zealand, as well as tourists who can get out. So the message is you really do only have a few hours left before to get home. Otherwise, you might be stuck where you are.
Thank you, Logan. That is Logan Church at Wellington Airport. And if you're listening or watching, you could see that there definitely still are planes coming and going there. Supermarkets and food retailers deny they've increased their prices as panic buyers continue to strip shelves of the basics. Some customers have taken to social media to complain that prices of items like soap, meat and fresh veggies have increased sharply. But supermarkets say their prices haven't changed and they're working around the clock to keep up with the skyrocketing demand, hiring nearly 1,000 extra workers over the past 10 days. Anusha Bradley reports.
When Auckland man Mike Rehu did an online shop with Countdown Green Lane on Monday, he got a bit of a shock. Things were noticeably more expensive.
So I took out an old invoice that I had from my online shop on the 8th of March, not 3 weeks ago, and replicated it on the trolley. So I clicked exactly what I got on the 8th of March and replicated it in the trolley. And lo and behold, the basket of goods was $50 more. It went from 120 to 170 in under 3 weeks. So that's, by my rudimentary maths in my head, that's almost 40%. And that is crazy.
The student and occasional broadcaster is not the only one. Hastings District Councillor Henare O'Keefe says he's been inundated with complaints about rising prices from locals shopping at Pack and Save and New World supermarkets in Hastings and Napier.
The feedback I'm getting is that the prices are gone beyond what they can afford. What they would normally pay, to their shock and horror, they go to purchase something, then they realise the price has been hiked. Rice, mince, hand sanitizer, all those essentials.
Henare O'Keefe says this means those on lower incomes are going without. In a statement, Countdown says it has not increased its prices, but fresh produce does fluctuate according to seasonal availability and market demand. It declined to elaborate on how much produce had fluctuated recently, saying it was too busy to answer this question. Foodstuffs, which owns Pack and Save and New World, did not answer questions from RNZ about whether its prices had risen. In a statement, it says due to extreme customer demand, its sole focus is getting the basics on the shelves, and it has, quote, no intention of increasing prices. Meanwhile, some Mad Butcher customers have taken to social media to complain about the meat retailer hiking its prices, but Chief Executive Mike Morton says that's also not true.
Look, I think there might be some confusion around the fact that often we do a whole lot of fixed price packaging, fixed price packs. So we'll go and say, you know, here's this pack for $20 and we'll show a discount and stuff down on it, but we haven't moved our retail prices whatsoever. I mean, we've been absolutely inundated, but all our retail prices stayed exactly the same and nothing has moved whatsoever. It's just the fact that we're not doing a lot of the fixed price packs.
Mike Morton says sales have increased more than 60% in the last week and all its head office staff are now helping out on the shop floor. Paymark figures show spending at food and liquor outlets, including supermarkets, topped $111 million on Monday, up 157% on the same time last year. Foodstuffs says it's hired 950 people in the last 10 days to cope with demand. All supermarkets say there is plenty of product and they will remain open throughout the Level 4 lockdown. They're urging people to shop safely and normally over the coming weeks. In Napier for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Do stay with us. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're with you until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown. Kitty Hannafin from Countdown will join us after 5 o'clock, so we'll ask her about those allegations of price hikes. And the Prime Minister will also be with us at around 5:20 this evening. And in breaking news, the Human Rights Commission has confirmed Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt has tested positive for COVID-19. If you're just joining us, let me bring you up to date with what's been happening today. A state of national emergency was declared at 12:21. Now, this means that the Civil Defence boss, Sarah Stewart-Black, has a number of new powers. They can requisition resources, they can conserve supplies, close roads and ban certain activities if need be. Now, she said publicly today that she hopes she doesn't have to use all of her powers, but she will use them to their fullest extent if people do not play by the rules. We are being told, the Prime Minister said today, reminded, stay at home, break the chain, save lives. Police are able to engage the military if they need further support. We know today that 50 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19 bring our total to 205 cases. 5 of those cases are connected to a particular school. Now, that is Auckland's Marist College. And the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says all students and staff from that school should already be in strict isolation. He also mentioned at his daily press conference that the cluster is a concern. 4 cases from the 205 are now regarded as community transmission. Now, what that means is that health authorities can't trace where those people have contracted COVID-19. A number of the new cases are directly associated with overseas travel. Amongst all the information today, a little bit of good news. 23 of the people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 have since recovered fully. 6 people are in hospital. None of them have had to use ICU care. We know that the total number of tests completed now is almost at the 10,000 mark, 9,780 to be exact, and 1,400 tests were processed yesterday. The Finance Minister today confirmed that potentially they are considering a universal basic income to help people who lose their jobs during the pandemic situation. And the Council of Trade Unions has raised concerns that employers, and not all of them, are passing on wage subsidies. We'll be back after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leia tawa tēnei. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she has a simple message for New Zealanders. Stay at home or risk lives and extending the lockdown period. The country will go into a 4-week lockdown from midnight. Ms Ardern says anyone breaking the rules could risk killing someone close to them.
Self-isolation is our best tool to beat the virus. But if you don't comply with the rules, you run the risk of forcing us to extend the period of lockdown. And worse, you could contribute to the virus defeating us and causing harm to thousands. I cannot repeat this enough. Staying at home will save lives.
Ms Ardern is warning there could be thousands of COVID-19 cases before the effects of the lockdown are felt.
The benefit of what we do today won't be felt for many days to come. Expect our numbers to keep rising because they will. In fact, modelling suggests we could have several thousand cases before we see the measures we're taking today having an impact.
Jacinda Ardern says the country will see change in time if everyone sticks to the rules. The government is introducing tougher measures for New Zealanders entering the country, including putting people in quarantine. Every New Zealander entering the country will be screened, and anyone displaying symptoms will be tested and put into an approved isolation facility. Jacinda Ardern says if someone is not symptomatic but has no plan or ability to self-isolate, they will also be placed in isolation. She says those who do have an appropriate isolation plan will be checked on by police, and if they're not following requirements, they will be fined and quarantined. The police and other government agencies now have the power to requisition petrol and other supplies, close roads and compel people to comply with the COVID-19 lockdown. The country has been put under a state of emergency this afternoon ahead of the move to alert level 4. The Director of Civil Defence Emergency Management, Sarah Stewart-Black, says she hopes the new powers will not be necessary and that people will follow the rules.
They need to be deliberate about any trips they're doing away from home. They're going out to get something from the supermarket. They're not just going out for a bit of a mooch. This is the time where actually stay home unless you've got a purposeful reason to be out.
Sarah Stewart-Black says the law allows for the state of emergency to be in place for 7 days, but it can be renewed within that time. There are 4 cases of community transmission and 2 clusters of confirmed COVID-19 cases in New Zealand. The Ministry of Health has reported 50 new cases of the virus today, bringing the total to 205. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the clusters have come from events and venues where they can be traced back to international travel, like the Hereford Cattle Conference.
We now have 5 confirmed cases within the community in one school, the Marist College in Auckland. The school is closed and has been closed all week, and all students and staff are being managed as close contacts. This means they are in self-isolation, monitored at home for the 14 days since they last had contact with each other.
Ashley Bloomfield says some teachers have shown symptoms and are being tested. The Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt has tested positive for COVID-19. Professor Hunt returned from a business trip to London and Geneva on Sunday the 15th of March and immediately went into self-isolation. The Human Rights Commission says during the week he started experiencing symptoms and was tested on Friday. A positive test was returned on Sunday. Professor Hunt says he is following the advice of health professionals and is recovering at home in Wellington. The local share market has had another strong day, buoyed by stimulus measures from the central banks and governments around the world. The benchmark New Zealand Top 50 index was up by 5% around midday, having gained more than 7% yesterday. However, it lost a bit of steam in late afternoon trading to end up 1.7% in line with the gains seen across the Tasman and the rest of Asia. It's just past 4 minutes past 5. The New Zealand Olympic Committee Chief Executive says athletes and sports bodies will take a financial hit from the postponement of the Tokyo Games. Japan and the International Olympic Committee says the Games will be rescheduled for no later than August next year due to the coronavirus. Karen Smith says High Performance Sport New Zealand spend a lot of money on potential Olympians in the year of the Games, as do the athletes themselves, and she concedes the postponement will cost them.
It's going to certainly cost people more money, and it's going to cost investment in high-performance sport and our athletes ourselves to reset, reorganise and look at the logistics. So certainly there's increased cost, which we now need to quantify and work through.
Karen Smith says the NZOC supports the postponement and says it gives athletes the certainty they need. And World Rugby is looking at the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the July internationals, with most rugby suspended until May at least. The governing body has held a virtual meeting to plot a way forward. The All Blacks are set to host Wales and Scotland. That's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. New Zealand is moving to alert level 4 at 11:59 tonight. This will save lives. You must stay home. Where you stay tonight is where you must stay from now on. You must only be in physical contact with those you are living with. It is likely level 4 will stay in place for a number of weeks. Remember, what you do now will affect all of us. Sticking to the rules matters. Stay home. Save lives. Find out more at covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Taumaranui. Cloudy periods, isolated showers. Showers clearing Whanganui and Manawatu tomorrow. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape. Fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine, but isolated showers about East Cape early tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow. Isolated showers developing. Turning to rain in Wellington at night. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine with some high cloud today. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon and evening with heavy falls possible in Canterbury and Otago. For Bulla and Westland, isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy, clearing Westland later in the day. Fiordland and Southland, light showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland, mainly fine with high cloud elsewhere. Showers becoming widespread and frequent tomorrow morning, easing tomorrow evening. For the Chatham Islands, often cloudy, a few showers today. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, I'm Lisa Owen and this is Checkpoint. We're with you until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown. The Prime Minister will join us at about 5:20 this evening. Border restrictions have stepped up a notch in the final hours before a nationwide lockdown. All New Zealanders travelling back from overseas will now be screened and sent to an approved facility to quarantine unless they can prove they can get safely from the airport to somewhere isolated without contact with anyone else. Meanwhile, Parliament has held a special sitting today to declare a state of emergency and issue an epidemic notice, as well as passing crucial legislation for the lockdown period and the massive financial support package. Our reporter Joe Moyer has the latest.
With another 50 new COVID-19 cases today, taking the total to 205, the Prime Minister made it clear things won't instantly improve in lockdown.
Success won't be instant. The benefit of what we do today won't be felt for many days to come. Expect our numbers to keep rising because they will, but don't be discouraged. Over time, we will see change if we all stick to the plan.
Jacinda Ardern has set out new rules for those arriving in the country, who are predominantly the people testing positive for Covid-19. She estimates anywhere up to 10,000 travellers will return by the end of the month. But that number is fluid, given about 30% of those who have airline tickets aren't turning up because they either haven't made a connecting flight or have made the decision to stay put overseas. Even if they can get home and get somewhere safe, there will still be checks.
You may not be at work, but that doesn't mean you don't have a job. Your job is to save lives, and you can do that by staying home and breaking the chain. And finally, if you have any questions about what you can or cannot do during this period, apply a simple principle. Act like you have COVID-19. Every move you then make is a risk to someone else. That is how we all must collectively think from now on.
The government will use facilities like motels and hotels to quarantine people, along with whangaparoa, which was already used in the early stages of the pandemic. A state of emergency epidemic notice was declared in Parliament today, giving the Civil Defence and Parliament powers. Civil Defence Director Sarah Stewart-Black says the government can requisition fuel, close roads, stop activities and people in places, and a range of other things around health and immigration. Ms Stewart-Black says ideally none of the special powers will be invoked, but if people don't comply with the lockdown, she won't hesitate to use them.
There will equally be no tolerance for people who do not comply with the requirement to self-isolate to keep New Zealand safe.
She says there are clear rules around what is essential travel and what is not.
They need to be deliberate about any trips they're doing away from home. They're going out to get something from the supermarket. They're not just going out for a bit of a mooch.
Ms Stewart-Black says it sounds daunting, but the lockdown doesn't need to be scary. She hopes people have heard the message and understand just how horrendous this could get, and that people could die without measures like the lockdown.
We're just talking about hanging out at home, and you've still got a TV and you've still got access to the water out of the tap and you've got the things in your cupboard, that actually we can just work through this step by step. And I think there's a reassurance here that, yes, those powers are there if we need them, but for most New Zealanders, they're going to stay at home because that's the safest place to be.
Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says health workers on the front line are being more exposed to the virus, but they're exposed to infectious diseases in their work every day. To try protect them and the family members in their bubble further, remote clinics have been rolled out nationally.
General practices have moved to doing as many consultations as possible remotely, so either by phone or by video conference, and that's really taking off this week. They will be able to and should be doing more of that once we go into alert level 4.
Parliament sat one last time today, albeit with a smaller number of MPs, before adjourning for 5 weeks. National Party leader Simon Bridges offered his full support for the move into lockdown as the government declares a state of emergency.
Today, on the big questions in this House and in New Zealand, we agree. There's no National or Labour or Green or ACT or New Zealand First, just New Zealanders. And we should be going to level 4, lockdown this evening.
And with that, the Prime Minister gave one final message to New Zealanders.
So New Zealand, be calm, be kind, stay at home and break the chain.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
It's been bedlam at supermarkets around the country as we head into lockdown, and today stores brought in new rules in a bid to keep everyone a little bit safer. Countdown now has a one customer in, one customer out rule to keep people far enough apart. Every second self-service checkout is closed for the same reason, and customers need to pack their own groceries. They're also now separated from checkout operators by a Perspex screen. Countdown's Kitty Hannafin joins us now. Good evening, Kitty. Can we start with this allegation that's floating around that people are being gouged on prices, that things have gone up since the COVID-19 issue came to the forefront? Is it true?
No, it's not, and it's really disappointing, I guess, to have to be dealing with this issue in the middle of everything else that we are dealing with. What has happened is that we have decided to not run any new or additional specials or promotions because we simply can't honour them because of the way that people are shopping, i.e. if we put a mailer out and it has a number of specials, well, we can't guarantee that they're going to be on the shelves, and we didn't want to be disingenuous and do that. It's not the time to, sort of let customers down in that regard as well. So we've had to stop specials and promotions for that reason. That said, there are still, 3,000 or 4,000 items in our business that are on a great price every day. We certainly haven't put prices up. Our prices remain, across the board still. Produce and meat fluctuates as it always does. It all depends on supply and seasonality. We can't change that. That is the way of the market. But at the moment, we are doing everything we can to keep the prices as they are.
Right, so the thing that people...
It's not true, and it's disappointing.
Right, so the thing that people may be noticing, Kitty, is that specials that you may have had, you're not doing the specials at the moment.
That's exactly it. You won't see the specials because we cannot honour them.
Is demand easing at all?
No, yesterday was another very big day for us, and I guess most disappointingly the day that we've seen the worst treatment towards our team. Today is a little bit better. Very distressing abuse towards our team and bad behaviour in the stores. So that's really disappointing to see.
What do you mean, Kiri? Are you talking about bad language, physical aggression, or can you just give us an idea of what they're having to put up with here?
Oh, I think just general abuse to our team for the state of the shelves. And again, it's not their fault. Where they are doing everything they can to fill those shelves. Anger at the crowds, outside waiting. Anger about stuff not being there that they wanted. Just general anger, and I guess people are just taking out their fear and anxiety on us. And yeah, I get it, but it's not kind. It's not okay.
Bad enough to bring in more security or even have the police there?
We've definitely got security and we've got the police on call. The police, which is brilliant relief for us, have agreed that we are a priority customer going forward, and they are keeping a close eye on us and will respond to any situations we have and popping in and visiting our stores. So that's great, a great comfort for our team. But I'm really hoping that from tomorrow that things settle down a little bit. Our new measures around the number of people in stores should help, and we're doing it to keep our customers safe and our team. It's not quite one in, one out. It will be if the stores are too busy, but what we're basically saying is if it's a really big store, we only want 100 people in there, and that means that we can all keep our distance from one another and shop and get out quickly. We just want the flow. We want you to get in and out and have space to do so within physical distancing parameters. But it depends on the size of the store. Every store will be a little bit different.
Okay, so give us an example there, Kitty. Give us a couple of stores that you would regard as big and would have a 100 customer limit.
So Mount Eden in Auckland is a big store that'll be 100 people. Say Cable Car Lane in Wellington, it's a tiny store that'll be more like 20, 25.
Okay. So are your staff, there's new protective measures for them. There's perspex screens. You're asking people, obviously, to keep their distance. You're taking every second self-service checkout out of there. But your staff...
every second checkout.
Yeah,
right. Every
as
second
well.
Checkout,
okay.
Yep, that's right.
So is there still a level of anxiety within your staff?
Yeah, of course. I think, they're really uncertain and apprehensive and scared, just like all of us. But we're doing everything we can to assure them and seeking guidance, as much as I can, trying to get the Ministry of Health to help us, make sure that we are providing the best level of care to our team and our customers. Really wanting that extra support, I guess, from the ministry there. But, having the physical distancing in place in stores, so spreading out the checkouts, having the perplex screens going up from today, all of that will help a lot. And also having the stores less crowded. I think that's a really good way that we can maintain the physical distancing. So we know the two things that we can all do in New Zealand is to keep the distance, to stay at home. If you're out in the supermarket, maintain the physical distance and wash your hands. And that is exactly the message and the processes that we're putting in our stores to make them as safe as we possibly can.
So in terms of your staff then, the ones who are still coming to work, is there any particular reward for them? Is there bonuses or increases in pay for the fact that they are working in these risky times and conditions?
Well, I guess we're doing, lots of things in that regard. I can't really talk about it on the national radio, I'm afraid. But in terms of everyday stuff we're doing, we obviously providing food right through the day. So we're feeding our teams they can shop before the store opens to make sure that at least at the end of the day when they finish their shift, they've got food for their family. So it's a little bit of, a little bit of relief for them in terms of, being able to look after their own family. We've been really clear about, looking after our team who are either elderly or unwell, and we're taking care of them. We've got, really good, strong provisions around leave and looking after your kids. So we're doing everything you'd expect at the moment. And then in terms of what next, we're still looking at that.
So in terms of schools closing, what additional, challenges does that present for your workforce as well? And is there any help you're able to offer there?
So we haven't got a full sort of understanding of the impact of that yet. We started off with, our elderly team. We've got 300-ish over 70. We've sorted them out. They're on leave now until this is over, and we're paying them, so they're looked after. Then we've dealt with our team who have got immune issues. They are now on leave, and we're looking after them until this is over. And now we're looking at the impact of, and because it's only the schools for our team have just closed today, so we don't know for certain yet. But we're managing that as we go, and it'll be store by store. We'll have the same. We'll apply it the same, but it's being managed at a store level as opposed to at my level, just because of expediency. Yeah.
Understand. Hey, thank you for joining us this evening. That's Countdown's Kiri Hannafin. It is 19 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Stay home, break the chain and save lives. An unprecedented day in New Zealand's history as the country goes into full lockdown tonight at 11:59. Well, joining me now is our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern. Good evening, Prime Minister.
Good evening.
Can we start with the new tough border controls that you've announced today? So people arriving home who have any symptoms will go to an approved facility. What are those facilities and how long will they have to stay?
So that by approved facilities, we essentially mean a quarantine. So they'll be going into things like hotels, or for instance, the facility we used at Whangaparoa, and they'll be there for 14 days. So that's anyone who's symptomatic, anyone who doesn't have a self-isolation plan, or the ability to get to their self-isolation without coming in contact with others.
And so does the government pick up the tab for that?
Yes, that is obviously something we're requiring and something we're providing. We are also putting additional expectations on those who say they have all of those plans in place and can get there without contacting or contact with others. Our expectation is police will follow up on those individuals. If they are not in self-isolation, they will be then quarantined and fined.
So how many places have you secured in, say, hotels and Whangaparoa camper vans? Are they an option? In total, how many spots have you got?
They are. So we have as many as, and this is really an estimate, Lisa, as many as 10,000 through to roughly the end of the month. But I'd say that could be on the high side. At the moment, roughly 30% of people ticketed to travel back to New Zealand are not showing up. In part, that's because transit options are dwindling, and so they're not able to get all the way through to New Zealand. So that's the upper end. We have several thousand places, so sufficient to meet our needs for those coming through the border.
So have you hired hundreds of camper vans already, Prime Minister?
So Whangaparoa, we have RVs available, yes, and also we have capacity that we've already assessed within proximity to the airports in which people are travelling to.
So Christchurch, Wellington and Auckland, camper van facilities?
Primarily, so camper van facilities we've already have in Auckland. Primarily, we're looking at those exit points at Auckland and Christchurch. Those are our primary international links now.
And what logistics are in place in terms of supplying these people with food and whatever they need? Because this is big scale, isn't it?
It is. And of course, that's when you're in those, obviously Whangaparoa we have practice with, so we're able to do that out there. That's the facility we used, remember, when we had the Wuhan operation. For hotels, the bonus of using hotels, of course, is the ability for us to have food provision within those facilities. And then for those who do have an adequate self-isolation plan, then of course we'll be inspecting and checking in on those individuals, and if they don't, then they go also into quarantine.
What about medical staff? Because there's a lot of issues being raised here. Some medical staff are concerned about returning home to their families and spreading it within even their own bubble. So are you looking at all for housing options for them, like putting them up in hotels?
Look, at this stage we haven't, but of course when they are within the medical, when they're in their day-to-day role, of course making sure they have all of the PPE you would expect, so the personal protective equipment, goggles, gloves, face masks. Of course, very helpfully, we have face mask production in Whanganui, churning out hundreds of thousands of face masks a day. So that's the first protection. The second, of course, there is guidance for people who are cohabiting with others around self-isolation. And I expect that those precautions are things that our medical practitioners will also be applying. But we've got to make sure we look after them day to day to the best of our ability.
So we have a state of national emergency now and an epidemic notice and extra powers, which Sarah Stewart-Black was explaining to us today. This is the Civil Defence Controller. Can you explain where this fits in the chain of command? Who is in control still? Is that you, or does Sarah have the lion's share of powers?
So at an operational level, yes, there are things that she's able to do around everything from, road management, the supply of certain provisions. Of course, those are things that are just triggered by the fact that we have a national civil defence emergency. So we don't expect that we're going to have to go through, things like the rationing of resources because we're keeping those essential supply chains open. I, of course, maintain my role in the day-to-day, overseeing the operations, overseeing what's happening, of course, across the country, making sure that we've got all of the legislative changes we might need in place, and we did a bit of that today with things like rent freezes and evictions, and making sure that we've got everything we need, of course, happening within our health system. So I maintain my role as Prime Minister whilst we have these operational powers in play as well.
So if there is a difference of opinion on requisition powers or other issues, who has the final call? Is that you or Civil Defence?
Oh, look, ultimately, I don't see there being a situation where we would be in disagreement over what needs to be done to look after the health, safety and well-being of New Zealanders. And so their decision-making is often very operational. We decide what needs to be done. They decide then how to deploy that on the ground.
Okay, you have said today that we should expect it to get worse before it gets better. How much worse?
Yes, you're absolutely right, because I say that so New Zealanders aren't discouraged. There's a lag time to this virus from the time someone has contact with it to the time they're symptomatic to the time they might be tested and shown to be positive. So the numbers will go up. The modelling suggests that we may have several thousand cases. And that could be, of course, within a 10 to 12 day period. I don't expect us to see numbers come away until after that. So don't be discouraged. Our numbers will continue to climb, but if we all follow the rules, we should still then see a difference being made.
So is there a specific number at which you would drop us back down to level 3, or will a peak in a decline be enough for you to reset the level?
Yeah, a combination of things. And I'm actually working with our scientists at the moment on looking at some of those markers that we'll want to see over time to help us assess what happens at the end of the 4 weeks. But I can give you a bit of a guide. We get good intelligence from about all of our cases. So when we have someone who tests positive, our public health people go in and really question that individual about where they've been, how they may have come in contact with COVID-19 and who they've been in contact with. That's how we knew when we had 2 cases of community transmission. We'll keep interrogating every case because that will tell us whether or not when after those 4 weeks we've got community transmission back under control. So that'll be one guide. Another guide will just be our cases overall.
I want to go through a couple of things quite quickly. So, Ministry of Education mentioned earlier in the week that TV could be used for children's education. So are you talking about or thinking about requisitioning one of the TV channels in order to provide school lessons?
Well, actually, at the moment, it's just we're having a conversation. Yeah, essentially, that's the outcome. Can we use free-to-air television stations to provide some of those resources? Because we're acutely aware, Lisa, not everyone will have access to online learning, and we don't want that to be a barrier. So we're having conversations with broadcasters at the moment. So less requisitioning at this moment in time. It's whether or not we can work together on a solution.
But like a dedicated education channel?
Yeah, that's the principle that we're working through. That's an option, and I think it's a very positive one. Help to give a bit of structure to Kids Day and to support parents, and again, help us to get over the digital divide.
Can we expect to see military on the streets?
Ultimately, you'll see police, and we're leaving it between the police and the Defence Force as to how they wish to work together, more broadly on just enforcement and supporting New Zealanders through this period, but primarily police.
Are you worried about the situation in Australia particularly? What's going on there?
Well, at the moment, obviously, with our border controls, we're our own island. We've got New Zealanders returning home, and we always have to allow New Zealanders to come back to their home, but we are otherwise isolated from others, and we made a very deliberate decision to do that. I am keeping an eye on what's happening around the world because that tells me ultimately what we should and should not do here. I'm using that as intelligence to guide our decision making, but my main focus is us.
Morale is going to take a hit over these 4 weeks. There's no doubt really about that. What do you think your role is in rallying our country?
Well, to prepare us for the bad moments, and that's why I am warning people that it will get worse before it gets better, but also to provide hope. Unlike other countries, we've used our window. We knew what was coming, and we acted, and we've done so before we've even had the sad situation of someone passing away from COVID. No country has gone into lockdown as early as we have. That provides us with the best hope possible. So I will keep sharing all of that intelligence and information and what people can expect, but I hope from time to time I can provide them a bit of hope too.
Earlier this week you said you weren't scared. What's one word that would sum up where you are at?
Hope.
We really appreciate your time this evening, Prime Minister, because I know it is an incredibly busy time. That is Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. If you are just joining us, this is Checkpoint on RNZ National and I'm Lisa Owen. We are with you through until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59. These are the vital numbers: 50 new cases confirmed or probable, and that brings our total number to 205. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Mayoral College. All students and staff from that school should already be in isolation. 4 cases are now regarded as community transmission, meaning health authorities don't know how people contracted it. The good news though, 23 of the 205 people are fully recovered, 6 are in hospital and none have had to have ICU care. 1,400 tests were processed yesterday. That's almost 10,000 tests in total. And as you will have heard, the Tokyo Olympics have been postponed until 2021. Mayors of our main cities will join us after 6. We're keen on your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme. 2101 is the text. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We've just had the Prime Minister on, and this little piece of feedback before we go to the headlines. This person says, "Thank you, Jacinda. You must be exhausted. You are a most extraordinary person and woman. The best Prime Minister in the world," says this person from Te Anau. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister says the government will pick up the tab to quarantine up to 10,000 returning New Zealanders as the country goes into lockdown. Jacinda Ardern has told Checkpoint people who do not have a plan to isolate themselves or cannot do so without contacting others will be accommodated in hotels or camper vans for 14 days. However, she says about 30% of people are not showing up for their flights because transit options are dwindling. Ms Ardern says police will follow up on people arriving in the country, and if they are not complying, they will be quarantined and fined. The Prime Minister says people must stick to the rules and stay home or risk other people's lives, and extending the 4-week lockdown, which starts at midnight. Jacinda Ardern is also warning that thousands of people could be infected with COVID-19 before the effects of the lockdown are felt. The country has been put under a state of emergency this afternoon for initial 7 days ahead of the move to alert level 4. The police and other agencies will be able to requisition petrol and other supplies, close roads and compel people to comply with the lockdown. But Sarah Stewart-Black from Civil Defence says people must follow the rules, including no unnecessary travel. There are 4 cases of community transmission and 2 clusters of confirmed COVID-19 cases in New Zealand. 50 new cases were reported today, bringing the total to 205. 2 senior civil servants have tested positive for COVID-19. The Chief Human Rights Commissioner, Paul Hunt, who returned from a business trip to London and Geneva 10 days ago, was tested on Friday after experiencing symptoms, and a positive result came through on Monday. And the New Zealand Film Commission has confirmed its Chief Executive, Annabelle Sheehan, has also tested positive and is recovering in isolation at home. Ms. Sheehan worked in the Wellington office for 3 days while she was asymptomatic but infectious. The local share market has been buoyed by stimulus measures from central banks and governments around the world. The benchmark New Zealand Top 50 Index closed up 1.7% in line with the gains seen across the Tasman and the rest of Asia. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is a Checkpoint special. We'll be with you until 7 o'clock this evening. Let's get to business now with Nona Peltier. Nona, trade stats. Now, this is going to be really interesting, isn't it? What period does it cover and what's it telling us?
It covers February, so it's not really some of the March downturn. Yeah. Well, there's crazier numbers to come for sure. But these numbers are still pretty, they tell us a little bit about what happened in China. So our imports from China were down 22%. And that's partly because a lot of the ships were coming back without full supplies on them. And we talked about that earlier about not having enough containers because ships were coming back with very few of them on there and so on. So we expected to see something like that. But overall, we had a surplus of 223 million. That's a seasonally adjusted surplus. When you look at it in unadjusted numbers, that was the strongest surplus we'd had since 2014. So that's very strong in terms of our exports. We were able to divert some of our exports that were destined for China to the United States. And so our export numbers were strong.
What kind of stuff were we talking about there,
meat, dairy products, that kind of thing. Of course, we knew that logs were down and that. But look, we don't have the March numbers yet. The value of imports was also down because of the reflecting the price of vehicle imports. We had fewer of those, and oil. So that those prices were definitely affected by that. So that's what happened with our trade numbers. The market's going to be looking very closely to what happens in March. We'll have those numbers soon enough.
Exactly. Hey, so the markets generally, what was going on today?
Well, we had another strong day, and that's because we're seeing central banks and governments across the world doing all they can to stimulate economic growth. And the markets have certainly responded well to that. So yesterday we had quite a strong rise. Today, again, not as strong, but we rose 1.7%. Around midday, we were up about 5%. We came down a little bit because of Australia again. You know, it tends to sort of temper us a little bit one way or another. So 1.7% up, 155 points to 9,264. So that's a pretty good day on the market. 2 days in a row, considering all the really awful days we've had. And look, things may be looking to the point where, you know, we've hit a bit of a floor. We'll have to wait and see. But it does seem like things have leveled off quite a lot. So, yes, volatility, but yeah, maybe some hope.
And did you have the dollar there for us?
I do. And the dollar was trading at 58.3 US cents. So a little bit better than we've seen. 97.6 Australian. So still relatively steady. We've had a little bit of volatility there. We were almost at parity, as you might remember.
Yep.
Not so long ago. 49.4 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business numbers there. And as businesses brace for the lockdown, many are still scrambling to figure out if they're allowed to open as essential services over the coming weeks. The government's released a list of businesses and services it says are okay to keep operating. Dairies will be open and the warehouse won't. But there remain some grey areas and some businesses who are adamant they'll keep their doors open regardless of what the rules say. Ben Strang reports.
The Mad Butcher says it's more than just a butcher and its stores will be open during the lockdown. That's despite the government saying butchers aren't an essential service and they should close. From 11:59 tonight, all non-essential services must close, while essential services such as supermarkets, pharmacies and petrol stations can remain open. The chief executive of the Mad Butcher chain, Mike Morton, says, based on legal advice he's received, its stores will keep trading.
We're not a standard butcher shop, to be fair. We're basically a mini supermarket. I think that's the first and foremost is, you know, look, we sell milk, we sell bread, we sell, you know, cold drinks, we've got sauces. I'm sitting in the shop now, we've got rice, we've got sachets, we've got, you know, chicken tonight stuff that you put in things, stir-fry sauces. But we're unsure. Look, our legal advice says that as of 8 o'clock last night, the latest update on the website, we are fully compliant.
Confusing matters for Mr Morton. He says the government told the Mad Butcher's lawyers to decide themselves if they were essential.
We've sent legal letters to the website that the ministry has. They said they have no 800 phone number, but that's not hooked up yet. They've said to us that we've rung them and we've spoken to them, our lawyers have, and they've said it's up to each individual business to decide whether they're an essential business or not. They won't comment whether we are or not, or give us clarification.
This afternoon, the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment's Deputy Chief Executive, Paul Stocks, was asked about essential services at a news conference. While the government's still working out some specifics, he was able to clarify that firewood sales would be essential service with winter approaching, as would some home deliveries.
The primary purpose here is to support safe and effective self-isolation. So there will be some instances that we're considering, for example, where essential whiteware, like a fridge or a washing machine, needs to be replaced. We want to find a way to ensure that people have access to that. Books don't fall into that category, but we are working that through now. Anything that we do in that instance will be done in a way where, if at all possible, we have contactless delivery. As I say, we're just working through that this afternoon.
Last night, the government said food delivery services like My Food Bag would continue under the lockdown, but takeaway deliveries through the likes of Uber Eats were off. Meals on Wheels are also allowed, but one provider of that service, Becky Irwood of Fed, says she doesn't know if she's supposed to shut the kitchen tonight.
So as we understand it, we have to fulfill a registration process. And then that is due by the end of day on Friday, but we're not actually sure whether or not that means we can continue with our business tomorrow and Friday, because based on last night's restriction, we're due to close. We do provide, we believe, a vital service, particularly for those people that are older or maybe sick or just not able to cook. And we've had a significant number of calls from those types of people specifically today asking us if we can deliver to them, and quite honestly we're not sure.
Becky Irwood says if she doesn't get clarification soon, some of her clients will be without food. While central government officials deal with the wider issues, local authorities are having to make calls on things like rubbish collection and recycling. In Wellington, Mayor Andy Foster says rubbish continues, but that's it.
Recycling is not essential, and there's been a variety of different approaches around the country. It probably depends on how the different collection systems work. Our system is quite manual in the sense that the people who in the trucks collect the product and handle the product, and so there's a risk of transmitting COVID-19 at that point, because we know that the disease or the virus can stay alive for up to about 3 days, we think, on surfaces like plastic and glass.
Andy Foster says while public parks will be open, playgrounds and toilets will be closed due to the risk of COVID-19 contaminating shared surfaces. As for Wellington's water woes, repairs on the city's pipes will continue during the lockdown. In the health sector, elective dental procedures or chiropractic work are off, but you'll still be able to access your doctor or a pharmacy. And the blood service is asking people to continue donating blood during the lockdown. Its spokesperson, Aska Burge, says blood stocks are good, but they only last so long.
The need for blood is constant. Blood only lasts 35 days. So while we currently, right now, have some good stocks because of people who have donated prior to, obviously, COVID-19, that may change, on a daily basis. So we're monitoring the demand, but what we need is people to actually book into those appointment slots, because by doing that, we can actually see who we've got coming in, how many people we've got coming in, and whether that's going to meet the demand or not.
Staff are taking extra precautions while taking donations of blood, and Aska Burge said people must book ahead if they want to donate. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
It is 17 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you're just joining us, we will be with you until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59pm. Today's numbers, 50 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19. That brings the total to 205. Border security will be stepped up. Everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened and those displaying symptoms of COVID-19 will be placed in an isolation facility. The Prime Minister says that includes camper vans, hotels and the previously used military camp at Whangaparoa. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College. It's being referred to as a cluster. There is another cluster of cases too. All students and staff from the school should already be in isolation. And 4 cases from that total are now regarded as community transmission. Now that means health authorities don't know how those people have contracted COVID-19. Tens of thousands of businesses have closed their doors this evening and won't open them again for at least another 4 weeks. The only exceptions are those designated essential services. Now, that includes the likes of supermarkets and petrol stations. The lockdown is going to put enormous financial pressure on them and the workers they employ. This week, the government extended its wage subsidy scheme to more than $9 billion and removed the $150,000 cap. It's also guaranteeing the lion's share of a $6.25 billion business loan scheme. But Finance Minister Grant Robertson has repeatedly said this will not save all businesses, nor will it save all jobs. The Employers and Manufacturers Association represents 7,500 businesses directly and 20,000 across the Business New Zealand network. Brett O'Reilly is the Chief Executive and he joins me now. Brett, as we inch closer to this complete shutdown, are you absolutely clear on what is an essential business?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. Look, it's been a tricky 48 hours as we've had to confront the level 4 status and which businesses can stay open or not. I think the message is the government has set out in the material that is available on the COVID site and through our network the businesses that they consider to be essential and the agencies that are responsible for the various sectors. Clearly, it's quite challenging because, once you get into the supply chains of some of those businesses, you'll find other businesses that may not be immediately apparent as essential. So the message is that gives us an outline. There are ways of clarifying whether you are an essential business or not, but a lot of it will come down to, frankly, businesses being sensible, considering what role they play in the economy, and at the end of the day, it's all about trying to isolate as many people as possible. So in our case, we're providing an essential service to business, but all of our staff will be working from home as of 11:59 tonight because we've got that in place. Other businesses won't have that luxury, but if you do believe that you're providing an essential service, limit that to as few workers as possible so we can try and keep as many people isolated and hopefully protected from COVID-19.
Do you anticipate, though, that there's going to be some businesses going rogue here? Because already there is talk that some businesses say they need to save their businesses, they need to stay open, they'll stay open regardless.
Look, human nature is an interesting thing in these cases, and with the over 1,000 calls that we've dealt with on our advice line yesterday and today, we've seen some of that. What I'll say to people is just take. In what
areas, Brett? What sort of fields have you seen some of that?
I think businesses just genuinely not being sure whether they're an essential service or not. We've seen a couple of cases like the Mad Butcher case that you featured earlier in the program, where businesses feel that they are providing a service and they want to stay open. I think the Prime Minister was pretty clear today. There will be a lot of scrutiny if people are open. That scrutiny will come from law enforcement agencies, and they will be asking businesses why they're open if they don't believe that they're part of the essential service mix.
So in that case, I'm really curious what you think of this. So in the Mad Butcher case, that's what the supermarket is for, isn't it? If we're trying to minimise contacts and minimise flow through businesses, supermarkets are there.
That's right. But I can equally understand, and I know Mike Morton, why they as a business have probably got a lot of stock already in their shops, and why they'd try and offer that as a service. But I think the key message here, and the government have been pretty consistent, we want as few people as possible having to go to a workplace. And so that's a consideration that people should have. Am I maximising the opportunity to keep as many people as possible isolated? And that's, I think, our broader responsibility at this time.
Are some of them taking the mickey, though?
No, I think I don't think anyone's doing that. I think people are genuinely conflicted when you're faced with, well, do I close or do I try and keep my my employees paid and try and operate? What I will say is that the government have launched a number of initiatives over the last few days and obviously last week to support business. They're pretty wide-ranging. And so the support is there for businesses, and I just urge everybody to we've had this, these discussions with businesses today, just to think carefully about whether you need to be open at a crisis time like this.
So let's talk about the wage subsidy, because again, some unions have been raising concern today that the wage subsidy is not going to the workers in the way that it should be, that some workers are still being asked to take leave over this 4-week shutdown, whether that be sick leave or holidays. What is your expectation here?
So there has been confusion over this, and obviously with the announcement around essential services, that's further complicated businesses who may have thought they were going to continue to operate but now realise that they're not an essential service, so they don't have to. The advice we've been giving our members and the businesses that have been calling us is, if you've applied for the wage subsidy, that full amount needs to go back to the employee, and the government guidelines are asking for you to pay 80% of that staff member's salary, and that should be your goal. But clearly, for some businesses, that's a stretch, and that's where it becomes difficult as they try and balance the various competing demands for funding.
Because the temptation, isn't it, Brett? Sorry to interrupt. The temptation is to take that money into the collective pool of cash for the business rather than passing it on to the workers. So I can understand confusion is one thing, right? If we can park that to one side for a second, are there some businesses who are looking for a loophole to get around passing it to the workers?
Not on the wage subsidy. I think it's pretty clear, and all the businesses that we've been talking to, all the ones that I've engaged with, are very clear that wage subsidy has to be provided to the staff members. Where there is some doubt and obviously some difficulty is the delta between that 585 amount and the 80%.
Right. Who picks up the shortfall?
Yeah, and I think businesses are clear, and I think the government has been very clear that it is intended that businesses meet that delta themselves. And clearly there are a number of ways where businesses can access alternative funds through some of the banking arrangements that were announced yesterday, though some of those are a little bit slow to be implemented, but they're coming, and obviously you can still contact your banks over the next few days. But it's that delta where if a business doesn't have that cash available today, a number of those businesses are saying to employees, look, what about taking annual leave? What about some alternatives to us having to meet that delta? And we've been in touch with the CTU through the Business New Zealand network and the union movement, and we understand their concerns about that, and we're working quite closely with them, and obviously keen to deal with any specific examples where we're happy if they're one of our members to go and have a talk to them and see if we can help them.
Okay, ultimately, what wage earners listening to this will want to know is this. So if you could give us a clear answer. If you have not been told explicitly that the person you work for is now out of business, over this next 4 weeks, should you expect to be paid in full?
If your employer has applied for the wage subsidy, and there's a reasonable expectation that most employers will be approved, and if you have been told that, and if you haven't been told you're not going to be paid, yes, you should assume that over the next 4 weeks you'll be paid at least some of your salary, if not 80% of your wage, to use that term.
So are you saying a minimum of 80% or it could drop below that?
The guideline from the government's clear. They expect employers to try and meet the 80% where they can.
All right. Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Brett O'Reilly from the Employers and Manufacturers Association talking there about what workers and, well, employers can expect over the next 4 weeks. The Covid-19 pandemic has officially put an end to the world sport's biggest event running this year. The International Olympic Committee has confirmed the 2020 Tokyo Games, which were set to start in July, will be postponed until next year. Although it brings fresh challenges, Clay Wilson explains why news of the postponement is being welcomed by many Kiwi athletes.
The future of this year's Olympic and Paralympic Games has been in doubt for weeks, but the International Olympic Committee has been reluctant to pull the pin. On Monday, the IOC said they would take a month to consider postponing the 2020 event. But with pressure mounting from athletes and Olympic committees around the globe, world sport's most powerful organisation had their hand forced. Black Sticks hockey player Shay McAleese says postponement provides much needed certainty and relief the games won't be cancelled altogether.
I think there was a fear that I think most people have had in the back of their minds. So at least we've got certainty now that it's still going to go ahead, obviously, as long as the world can get this COVID-19 under control. But it's also good that the IOC aren't pushing for a start date in July because it just was not really tenable.
The postponement is the first time the Olympics have been cancelled or delayed for a reason other than a world war. Nelson pro cyclist George Bennett has been training indoors at his house in Andorra and opted to stay in Europe on the outside chance the Games still went ahead. But things really hit home when the virus started killing hundreds of people around him.
Athletes in general are quite optimistic people, and they're so goal-driven and they've just got tunnel vision towards a goal. But now and then you have a conversation with someone and you sort of come to the realisation that you think, okay, if we're not now training from late May or June or August, we might be training for 2021.
That much is now for sure. While it provides valuable certainty in already difficult times, the postponement does create challenges going forward. However, for at least one top Kiwi athlete, the news is positive on all fronts. Pole vaulter Eliza McCartney, who won bronze at the 2016 Rio Olympics, has struggled with injuries since the 2018 Commonwealth Games.
It was a push to even get to where I am today, being able to run normally again and do my pole runs on the track. It's been really hard to get here as quickly as we have, and I had been rushing and putting my body on the line to be prepared in time for Tokyo. And it was going well, but a whole extra year can only be a good thing for my body.
A whole extra year, though, is not necessarily an easy prospect for older athletes such as 41-year-old rower Mahe Drysdale and 36-year-old runner Nick Willis. At 35, Black Sticks veteran Shay McAleese is in the same boat, but says the postponement won't be forcing him into international retirement.
As an older athlete, there's always those challenges of your body, and we've only had a little girl 5 weeks ago, so I've got that to contend with, plus work as well. So there's a lot of things that I'll have to tick boxes to make sure it's all go. But having a talk to my wife, we're thinking that's where I'd like to go, but a few things that a few of us will have to get into alignment.
Part of that may be grappling with the financial impact of the postponement. New Zealand Olympic Committee Chief Executive Kieran Smith says High Performance Sport New Zealand spends a lot of money on potential Olympians in the year of the Games, and she concedes the news will cost them.
It's going to certainly cost people more money, and it's going to cost investment in high performance sport and our athletes ourselves to reset, reorganise and look at the logistics. So certainly there's increased cost which we now need to quantify and work through.
Like the rest of the country though, the immediate priority for New Zealand athletes is hunkering down and staying safe. But that certainly doesn't mean they'll be staying idle. And former Olympic triathlon champion Hamish Carter, the head of high performance at Triathlon New Zealand, believes most athletes will take the entire situation in their stride.
Most athletes go through periods where they're injured or they have a severe drop in form or they may need to change coach. So they're pretty used to things changing on them. I think what this is really challenging is that this change is completely out of their hands and it's significantly bigger than themselves or sport.
A new start date is still to be confirmed, but the IOC says the Tokyo Games will take place no later than next year's Northern Hemisphere summer. For Checkpoint, Clay Wilson.
Let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6. This person says, my neighbours have this afternoon set up chairs, not at any great distance from each other, at the rear of a shared driveway. There are members of at least 3 different families from the street, including children gathered. They are sitting in the sun and chatting. At level 3, this person says these people are already supposed to be limiting contact and staying at home, aren't they? Yes, I think that's true. How is this sort of lack of understanding of what we are expected to do going to be policed? They are oblivious and irresponsible, but all adults and educated. So lack of knowledge is not an issue. While today both the Civil Defence Controller and the Prime Minister said there would be zero tolerance for that kind of behaviour, but urged people not to be the enforcers themselves, and if there are ongoing concerns to report it. Donna has got in touch about Newlands New World. Donna says, I got everything I needed except flour. Prices all good, staff very helpful. I'm 72 and usually only shop for immediate needs, so have found the last few days of empty shelves challenging. But staff at Countdown, Johnsonville and New World, both helpful and prices are standard. Bring back the milkman, says Donna, although I think the milkman's supposed to be in lockdown as well, Donna. And Gillian has got in touch to say, I am so grateful for Jacinda Ardern's remarkable leadership and her ability to empathise whilst maintaining clear-sighted vision of what we must all do to unite for a new way forward. After 6, we're going to be talking to the mayors of Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin and Auckland, what this means for the city, what essential services you can expect to still run, like the buses, whether it's the rubbish pickup, all the rest of it. Today, the Prime Minister introduced new strict border controls for people returning to New Zealand if they show signs of Covid-19. She says they will be facilitated to an isolation centre.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The Prime Minister says the government is preparing to quarantine thousands of New Zealanders returning from overseas as the country moves to lockdown tonight to stop the spread of COVID-19. Jacinda Ardern has told Checkpoint those people with symptoms of the virus or who do not have a plan to isolate themselves or cannot get home without coming into contact with others will be accommodated in hotels or camper vans for 14 days.
We are also putting additional expectations on those who say they have all of those plans in place and can get there without contacting or contact with others. Expectation is police will follow up on those individuals. If they are not in self-isolation, they will be then quarantined and fined.
Jacinda Ardern says the government has several thousand quarantine places. Civil Defence has been granted extraordinary powers under the national state of emergency declared today due to the threat of COVID-19. The head of Civil Defence Emergency Management, Sarah Stewart-Black, says the police and other agencies have the power to requisition, to manage fuel and other supplies, close roads and stop people doing certain activities. She says the rules are there to keep everyone safe and she hopes enforcement will not be necessary.
We're just talking about hanging out at home, and you've still got a TV and you've still got access to the water out of the tap and you've got the things in your cupboard that actually we can just work through this step by step.
Sarah Stewart-Black says stress levels will be high, but there's no need to panic. And a skeleton crew of MPs have debated an epidemic notice giving the government emergency powers. MPs have passed a bill putting in place the necessary arrangements in order to implement the Covid-19 alert level 4 that kicks in at midnight tonight. It also introduces measures such as rent freezes and protecting against evictions during the lockdown period. MPs have also passed legislation allowing the government access to $52 billion for the lockdown and various support measures. Legislation has also been passed approving urgent tax and social assistance changes, including raising the provisional tax payment threshold and removing the hours test for the in-work tax credit. New Zealand's case numbers have doubled in 2 days, with 50 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed today. On Monday, the total was 102. The number is now 205. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says the number of cases will continue to rise for the next 10 days.
So there are 50 new confirmed and probable cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand as at 9:30 this morning. 47 of those are confirmed cases and 3 are probable cases. So our combined total of confirmed and probable cases in New Zealand to date is 205.
Ashley Bloomfield says they're still classifying only 4 cases as community transmission. Age Concern Auckland is urging people to look out for the elderly as the country heads into lockdown. Its Chief Executive Kevin Lamb says it's likely many more older people will feel isolated and lonely, and some will struggle to do basic things like getting groceries. He says there's added stress because of the long waits to get supermarket deliveries.
What we're finding is that for a lot of older people, they really are now concerned. It's not so much that they can't afford food or have the means to buy it. They simply physically can't get it.
Kevin Lamb says they're working with supermarkets to see if older people can be prioritised for deliveries. But he's also urging people to help people in need in their communities by offering to pick up their groceries or dropping off a meal. Countdown says it's doing all it can to keep prices stable. The supermarket chain now has a one customer in, one customer out rule to keep people far enough apart. Customers are also packing their own groceries, and perspex screens separate them from checkout operators. Countdown's Kitty Hannafin has told Checkpoint claims that they are price gouging are disappointing.
We have decided to not run any new or additional specials or promotions because we simply can't honour them because of the way that people are shopping, i.e. if we put a mailer out and it has a number of specials, well, we can't guarantee that they're going to be on the shelves.
Kitty Hannafin says the supermarkets continue to be busy. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. The Olympic pole vault bronze medalist Eliza McCartney says the IOC's delay in postponing the Tokyo Games is frustrating and will have taken a mental toll on athletes. Japan and the International Olympic Committee this morning delayed the Games because of the coronavirus pandemic, with the Olympics to take place no later than August next year. McCartney wonders why it took so long for the IOC to take the athletes' and health experts' views into consideration.
It was frustrating, and I guess that's what put the pressure on them in the end, is that a lot of federations and national bodies and athletes were all saying, you know, we just need to know that it's being postponed. You can work out the details as time goes on, but we just want to know that it's being postponed so that we can get on with it.
Eliza McCartney. Meanwhile, Japanese Olympic Committee President Yasuhiro Yamashita says the decision to postpone came quicker than expected, but he wanted to make sure the event was a success after the delay. Pressure had been building on the IOC that a seemingly inevitable decision had taken so long, but Yamashita says it is now time to be positive and prepare. That's the news.
This is a COVID-19 official government announcement. New Zealand is moving to Alert Level 4 at 11:59 tonight. This will save lives. You must stay home. Where you stay tonight is where you must stay from now on. You must only be in physical contact with those you are living with. It is likely Level 4 will stay in place for a number of weeks. Remember, what you do now will affect all of us. Sticking to the rules matters. Stay home. Save lives. Find out more at covid19.govt.nz.
Now the short forecast from Met Service till midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Taumaranui. Cloudy tonight, isolated showers. Showers clearing Whanganui and Manawatu tomorrow. Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taihape, fine apart from isolated evening showers. For Gisborne through to Wairirapa, fine, but isolated showers about East Cape early tomorrow. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow with isolated showers developing, turning to rain in Wellington tomorrow night. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine with some high cloud today. Rain developing tomorrow afternoon and evening. Heavy falls are possible in Canterbury and Otago. For Bulla and Westland, isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy, clearing Westland later in the day. Fiordland and Southland, light showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland, mainly fine with high cloud elsewhere. Showers becoming widespread and frequent tomorrow morning, easing tomorrow evening. Chatham Islands often cloudy, a few showers today. RNZ National, it's 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Welcome to our Checkpoint special. We will be on air and with you until 7 o'clock this evening as we head towards tonight's lockdown. The government has declared a national state of emergency due to the threat from Covid-19, giving police and other state agencies sweeping powers to enforce lockdown and stop its spread. There are 50 new cases of the virus today, bringing the total in New Zealand to 205 so far. Civil Defence Emergency Management Director Sarah Stewart-Black has told a media conference the country was put under a state of emergency at 12:21 this afternoon, ahead of the move to Alert Level 4 tonight at 1 minute to midnight.
The state of national emergency has been declared because of the unprecedented nature of this global pandemic and to ensure the government has all the powers it needs to slow the spread of COVID-19 and reduce its impact. This allows me, in my statutory role as the Director of Civil Defence Emergency Management, to direct and coordinate personnel, material and other resources to ensure they can be made available.
Ms Stewart-Black says the police and other agencies have also been granted extraordinary powers to contain the virus.
Some examples are powers of requisition to manage wider consequences, for example, providing for the conservation and supply of fuel and other essential supplies, closing of roads, stopping people doing activities that may contribute to the emergency, excluding people from places, prohibiting or regulating traffic.
Sarah Stewart-Black says police will have the power to bring in military reinforcements if required.
We're really hoping that actually people have heard the messages and understand how horrendous this could get. We don't want thousands of people to die. It is that plain and simple. So if we're asking for people to stay home and really plead that message about self-isolation, this is for the good of everyone. If we can each imagine that we want to keep ourselves and those around us safe, let's act in that ability. But what I would say is there will equally be no tolerance for people who do not comply with the requirement to self-isolate to keep New Zealand safe.
The Director-General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says the 50 new cases today bring the total number to 205. 6 people are in hospital, 3 in Wellington, 1 in Rotorua and 2 in Waikato. But all are stable and none are in intensive care. Dr Bloomfield warns it is going to get worse before it gets better, with more suspected cases of community transmission on top of the 4 already confirmed.
Even as we go into Alert Level 4, we will continue to see a rise in cases for at least 10 days. That is because the infections we are finding today and over the coming week to 10 days are people who have been infected before today. So the numbers will continue to increase before they turn around. That turnaround will happen if all New Zealanders do what is being asked of them. That is, to stay at home, to break the chain and save lives.
Dr Bloomfield says hospitals and GP clinics have enough masks and PPE, that is personal protective equipment, and the Ministry is also working to get them to other frontline workers.
This is not something that's usually done in the normal situation, so we're working with DHBs. And what our intention is to do is to bring that into a national process. Of course, we will work with the DHBs because they are the organisations on the ground that have that PPE. and or we will arrange for direct distribution to a whole range of others like home and support, community support workers, pharmacies and so on. Separately, there will be a process for distributing masks to essential workers who have contact with people, for example, in supermarkets or other places.
Deputy Chief Executive at the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment, Paul Stocks, says officials are urgently working through options for getting people the services they need while in isolation.
The primary purpose here is to support safe and effective self-isolation. So there will be some instances that we're considering, for example, where essential whiteware, like a fridge or a washing machine, needs to be replaced. We want to find a way to ensure that people have access to that. Books don't fall into that category, but we are working that through now. Anything that we do in that instance will be done in a way where, if at all possible, we have contactless delivery. And as I say, we're just working through that this afternoon.
Civil Defence Emergency Management Director Sarah Stewart-Black says the move to level 4 is significant and people need to take heed of the clear advice they have been given in recent days.
So it's also just taking a bit of a breath that we're just talking about hanging out at home, you know, and you've still got a TV and you've still got access to the water out of the tap and you've got the things in your cupboard, that actually we can just work through this step by step. And I think there's a reassurance here that, yes, those powers are there if we need them, but for most New Zealanders, they're going to stay at home because that's the safest place to be.
And Civil Defence will be issuing a nationwide emergency mobile alert between 6 and 7 o'clock tonight to reinforce to New Zealanders the critical message to stay home. All but essential services will be locked down at precisely 11:59 tonight. So what exactly does that mean for our biggest cities? Will the rubbish still be collected? Can you still wander along the waterfront? And can you expect some relief from your rates if you are feeling the financial squeeze due to COVID-19? Let's go first to Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Mr. Goff, can we start with homeless people? What's going to happen with them in Auckland?
Well, they're obviously a particularly vulnerable group because of often their medical conditions, and they're exposed to the elements, and they are probably one of the most difficult groups, particularly those sleeping on the street, to mobilise. We as a council are working closely with the Auckland City Mission, so we're trying collectively to get as many people off the street as we can. There have been steps taken, for example, utilising motel accommodation, which is readily available at the moment, as you might imagine, to lower the numbers of people in groups like the James Liston Hostel, which holds about 52 people, but it's too confined a situation, so we need to spread people out. We also need to make sure that we can ensure services to allow people that are on the street to eat when everything else is closed down.
So does the government pick up the tab for that, or does the city?
The city will be playing its part, but we're working. I mean, the substantial finance that may be needed for any initiative that will be taken will largely come from government. But we are part. What we're trying to do, Lisa, is not to have 75 different responses to this crisis situation, but to have a government, all of New Zealand response, which we as the country's biggest council can play our role in. Now that may mean seconding staff to groups like our district health boards. We've made that offer. We're working with the district health boards now. Some of our staff that aren't doing their normal activities are skilled people. We can make those skills available to help with the delivery of essential services.
So I understand you've had a conversation with the Prime Minister today. What was the nub of that?
Look, it's just to make sure that we are coordinating with central government as closely as we can. I'm in huge admiration of how she has been so calm and collected dealing with a crisis of an unprecedented nature across our country. I've asked to have a minister that is on the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee that we can liaise directly with. We can feed information.
Do you know who that will be?
Most likely to be Carmel Cepoloni, because she is both an Auckland minister and she's on the COVID-19 Cabinet Committee. But it's really important that I'm setting up networks of local community and business leaders in Auckland so that we can feed information directly to government. We're not out on the street doing the things that we normally would to get feedback. So trying to deliberately create networks so that I can get input from community and business leaders in Auckland and in turn feed that on to government, and for government to feed back information through us. That's another role that we can play as local government. Obviously, the biggest role we'll be playing, as your intro suggested, is we're running essential services that must keep going. The supply of clean water, the disposal of wastewater, the picking up of rubbish and recycling each week, making sure that the port continues to open, because that's a lifeline for us in terms of the imported goods we need for our supermarkets.
On that note, I just want to ask you a couple of quick questions, if we can go through this, because these are the things people are really interested in. Is there potential for rates relief if you're being hit financially by COVID-19?
Well, under our normal rules, that will apply. For people that can't pay their rates, as against people who won't pay their rates, we're extraordinarily reluctant to take action against those people. There'll be people in all sorts of hardship positions, and we will try to work out ways in which we can cope with that to enable people to survive and without putting them under pressure. At the same time, of course, we've got a limited income stream, and we've got to remain financially viable, so we won't be able to do the big package type stuff that the government can do, but under normal rates relief programs, we will look to ease pressure on people who have no ability at all to pay their rates. Clearly, you know, we're not going to try to get blood out of a stone. Right. We're not going to try to make desperate situations worse.
So free parking, is it in the city at the moment, especially for people who are still going to work?
I think one of the curious side effects of this is that we're not going to have a congestion problem on our roads nor in our parking. There won't be that many people in the city, and we won't be having our traffic wardens out there on the road. That's not an essential task, and we won't be putting them at risk.
And before you go, who is in your bubble?
My wife and I at the moment, but we do live on 20 acres, so we can spread around a little bit. The biggest challenge, I think, for my wife and myself is there's at least a month where we're not going to be able to give our grandkids a cuddle, and that's quite hard, as it is for every family.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. That is Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Now, let's head down to Wellington, and Mayor Andy Foster joins us now. Andy, lots of people are going to want to do nice things for other people during lockdown. What is your advice around that?
Look, we're just working on how we can best link the people who want to help with the people who need help, because obviously we've got to make sure that we do that safely. We know that we've got a considerable student volunteer army, and I know that there are quite a number of people, for example, who have contacted some of our local supermarkets and said, hey, I can help distribute food to the people who need it. So these sort of things are starting to spring up. I've heard about some possibilities of bringing together some businesses that people can effectively have to drive in service to pick up food. So there's quite a range of different things that people are looking at the moment.
So Wellington is a city of public servants. Are you assuming there's still going to be a few people moving around?
Look, really, it'll be down to essential services like anywhere else. And if the public servants are essential to the COVID-19 response, then, or to critical services, then they'll be moving around. But for most of us, no, we'll be tucked up at home.
So what do you reckon the biggest challenge is going to be for your city?
Oh, look, it's probably the same challenge that everybody else is going to have. But I think I heard some really good advice from somebody on the radio this afternoon who'd just been through the lockdown in China, and it was basically to say, well, make the most of this time, because we don't often get that opportunity to spend some time with family or friends, the people you live with, in an unbroken fashion, to maybe slow down a little bit, to get some of those tasks around the house done that maybe we've been waiting for a decade or so, and certainly in my case. So there's some opportunities to make the most of it. And as a city, I think it also gives us a chance, once we sort of get used to this, to raise some of the big questions that we need to discuss as a city anyway, and maybe we get people more focused on those issues.
So when you're not going to be spending your time running the city, what's going to be your go-to project?
With a fair bit of painting, deck to deal with. The garden needs a bit of attention. Those kind of things.
Let's get through the quick list of what's open, what's not, what's happening. So rates relief. Will you offer rates relief if people are feeling the pinch from COVID-19?
we're very, very conscious that our business community in particular and their employees there are employees who've lost jobs or had hours truncated. They're the ones who we're most focused on. We will be looking at what we do with the final rates instalment of this year and whether we can defer payment of that for people who need it. And then looking at what we do with the next year's rates as well. So we're very, very conscious that it's going to hurt council a lot, but this is the rainy day that we need to basically borrow for some of these operating costs that we have to spend.
Are your parks and areas like the waterfront still open, and can I run along those as long as I'm on my own?
Look, there's some places that you can run. Today we did close Zealandia, the zoo, Macra Peak Mountain Bike Park, and all of our 115 playgrounds. So you can get out and go for a run or a walk in the bush tracks. I think the waterfront will be fine, provided you're keeping your distance from other people. But playgrounds aren't, and the reason for that is that you don't know who has been there before. You don't know if they've been suffering from the disease, and if they are, we know that the virus will last on some of these surfaces, plastic, glass, metal surfaces for up to 3 days. So we can't take the risk that the disease will be transferred by keeping the playgrounds open.
What's the deal with your buses?
The buses are run by Greater Wellington, but they will keep running on a Sunday-ish timetable. So the timetable is going to be tweaked a little bit so as to help particularly people who are accessing the hospital, doctors and nurses. So they'll be running a little bit earlier and a little bit later than they would normally on a Sunday.
And is that free?
It's free, and people will be boarding from the back of the bus, so they don't have to interact. In fact, we don't want them to interact with the driver. The one piece of advice that I would give is please wash your hands before getting on the bus and then again after, because again, it's that surface contact you want to try and avoid transferring the virus.
Andy, before you go, who's in your bubble?
My wife and my 2 children, 2 teenage children.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much. That's the Wellington Mayor, Andy Foster. It is 23 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you are just joining us, we're with you through until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59. Now, today's numbers, 50 new confirmed or probable cases of COVID-19, bringing the total to 205. Border security, the Prime Minister has announced, will be stepped up. Everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened. If they have symptoms of COVID-19, they'll go into an isolation facility, which could be a camper van, hotel or Whangaparoa, the military camp up there. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College. Now, 4 cases in the total are regarded as community transmission, meaning that health authorities still can't track down where people have contracted it. Most of the cases are associated with overseas travel. The Human Rights Commission has confirmed Chief Human Rights Commissioner Paul Hunt has tested positive for COVID-19. The good news in all of this is 23 of the 205 people are fully recovered. 6 are in hospital, but none have needed ICU care. 1,400 tests were processed yesterday, and that takes our total number of processed tests to almost 10,000. And you may have heard that the Tokyo Olympics have been postponed until next year. Let's go to Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins now. Hi Aaron, how many students have gone home, do you think, from your city?
Yeah, kia ora, Lisa. It's only a month or so since the city roared back into life at the start of the university year, and here we are, only a few weeks later, facing an eerie silence. I don't have numbers, certainly, of how many have gone home and how many have stayed here, but it's certainly caused a lot of stress for our student population, not just the uncertainty of the situation, but obviously the financial implications of having to make last-minute travel arrangements if they want to go into isolation with their own families, wherever they may be based.
So have you felt that the city has really emptied out?
Well, it's hard to tell when nobody leaves the house. It's hard to know how many people are here. But it certainly feels very quiet, more so even than the summer months do here.
So the students who are sticking around and who may be staying in flats for this time, are they taking it seriously, do you think?
Well, one would hope so, and I don't think it's ever useful to try and speak of the student population as one homogenous group. So just like all groups in our society will be taking this more or less seriously, so would I expect they would.
So your city, do you face any particular challenges, you think, over this 4 weeks? Obviously, we're expecting to get into the cooler temperatures as well. Any particular challenges for you guys?
I think the biggest challenge that we face is as this wears on, is the cost of social isolation. We are a social being, humans, and I think being cut off from family and friends and colleagues over the course of weeks will take its toll, particularly for those people in our community who don't have internet access, and that's quite something. When everybody's being told to FaceTime your gran instead of going to visit, that's fine if you can actually do that. And obviously all of the stuff around self-isolation presumes that people have regular lodgings and a home to go to, and we know that that's not true for everyone. So I think that's going to be particularly challenging for our more vulnerable population.
Are you getting any particular help with that?
Certainly, we're dealing with the Ministry of Social Development around our sleeping rough population. I know our city's chief executive has made direct contact with some of the more regular visitors to the CBD to make sure that they have somewhere to live. Unfortunately,
and do they?
And they do. They have places to stay, which is useful to know. The Dunedin Night Shelter has unfortunately closed temporarily, which offered respite for some of them. And I know the MSD are working to find temporary solutions for that cohort.
I just want to go through a list of things that people are really interested in. So rates relief, will you be offering that if people have financial trouble during this time?
Certainly, if people are struggling to pay their rates over the next wee while, we would take a compassionate approach. If people got in touch with us, we can make arrangements for them to pay that in a way that is that they can manage. And then certainly from July, we're looking at not increasing our rates, setting a 0% increase in rates and borrowing money to fund the operating shortfall instead.
So what's the deal with rubbish collection in your city, and how many staff have you got dealing with essential services on deck?
I don't know how many staff are dealing with it. The rubbish collection will continue as normal. Recycling services have been put on hold, and we're asking people to store that until we're at the other end of this. But yet, our essential services will continue. Rubbish collection, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, paying the bills, all of that. All of those essential services will continue. The rest of our staff will be working from home. We've got about 25 redeployed to support the Ministry of Health with contact tracing and other elements of the community response to COVID-19.
And so if people on their daily exercise, which they're still allowed to do, what bits of the city do they still have access or not access to?
Well, the advice we've got, and certainly Mike Bush has made this reasonably clear, the idea is that people can go outside for a walk, but go for a walk around your backyard or around the block. It's not a time to go for a hike in the hills. So I would recommend to people that they stay as close to home as possible and getting their necessary daily exercise over the next 4 weeks.
Aaron, who's in your bubble before you go?
My wife and my 4-year-old son. I'm still adjusting to setting up a working office inside a childcare facility.
Good luck with that. Thank you so much for joining us. That's the Dunedin Mayor, Aaron Hawkins. Now let's head to Christchurch and Mayor Leanne Dalzell. Leanne, your city has experienced some pretty tough times over recent years. How do you think people are going to cope with this extra pressure of being in a lockdown situation?
Look, it is going to be hard. So I do want to say that. And a lot of people have reflected on the amount of, or the significant number of challenges that Christchurch has had to face. And I'm not going to use the resilience word because people get quite annoyed with that phrase because it diminishes the anxiety that people feel at challenging times. And we're allowed to feel anxious and we're allowed to feel stressed. And I think that was a message that we learnt very much from the earthquakes when those aftershocks just kept on coming, even though we thought the worst of it was over. So we have been through this before, and every time we've been through some sort of adversity, we've always managed to reach out to each other, and that's something that we naturally do by instinct. But this time we have to reach out in ways that don't involve connecting physically with people. And so the messages that I've been giving is that, our parks are still open. The playgrounds might be closed down. The Botanic Garden, sadly, has to close down under these circumstances as well. But the park is open, lots of open space, and the wonderful thing about being a garden city is that this is the moment that we can enjoy that, and we can still wave out to each other. We can still connect in sort of non-verbal ways. There's just a smile and a wave and a hi, how you going? We're all in this together. That really will go a long way. So I am encouraging people to do that as long as they keep their distance.
Do you have contingencies in place should there be another emergency for your city during this time? For example, an earthquake.
Look, yes, we've had pandemic planning on our sort of risk radar for a significant amount of time. I mean, we actually in Christchurch, you won't even know this, had a small outbreak of H1N1 in 2009. The preparation work that went into that and actually led to it being fully contained within a very small area of Christchurch. So we were well prepared and well planned for. That got us through that. And most people didn't even know. But actually the planning and the work that went into that made sure that we were better prepared when 2010 happened, which was the first of the earthquakes. So every experience that we go through better prepares us, and we're always aware. In fact, we were even talking today about the fact that we have to recognise that we still have other vulnerabilities, we still have other risks, and we have to make sure that we keep both headroom from a financial space, but we also need to know what would happen if this happened. Now, we're in a state of a national emergency right now, so that actually has given central government all of the powers that it needs to deal with this. If we were to face another emergency on top of that, then we'd simply find ways of collaborating with central government to make that work for our city as well. We've been very well prepared this time. The incident management team of the City Council was stepped up on the end of January, and so they've been working towards this eventuality, of a lockdown for, a good 2-3 months, and that's got us into the position where we're able to keep the essential services of the city running.
Look, we're just hours away from going into complete lockdown. Before you go, let us know who's in your bubble.
My husband Robbie, and he's got the office in our little inner city apartment, so I can see what's going on in the city. It's very, very quiet in there at the moment, but no, Rob's got the office and I'm out in the lounge.
Really appreciate your time this evening. That is Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell. It is 26 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Actually, that's to 7, sorry. If you're just joining us, we will be here until 7 o'clock tonight as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59pm. Small communities fear their limited resources will be pushed to their limits as people escape to their batches for lockdown. Kids Can hopes it will be able to operate as an essential service during the nationwide lockdown as it continues to feed children not at school. And we will answer more of your questions about what you can and can't do during the lockdown period. It, though, is time for the headlines now with Susanna.
The government is getting ready to quarantine thousands of returning New Zealanders as the country moves to lockdown at midnight to stop the spread of Covid-19. Jacinda Ardern says the government has places in hotels or camper vans for people with symptoms and will also quarantine those with no isolation plan. Civil Defence Director Sarah Stewart-Black says the state of emergency announced this afternoon gives the police power to requisition fuel and other supplies, close roads and stop certain activities. activities. MPs have passed a bill putting in place the necessary arrangements to implement the Alert Level 4 from midnight tonight and introducing rent freezes and protection for tenants against eviction during the lockdown. Countdown says it now has a one customer in, one customer out rule to keep people far enough apart, and people are packing their own groceries with perspex screens to protect checkout operators. Those are our latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 7.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and we're on air until 7 this evening. The head of New Zealand's largest bank is reassuring customers there is plenty of cash in the ATMs and the financial system is sound, as economists warn of a shock which could dwarf the global financial crisis. ANZ Chief Executive Antonia Watson says staff were gearing up for customers to start applying for a mortgage payment holiday from Monday. That will mean a 6-month pause in payments and not losing your house. But there's a catch. The interest will still mount in the meantime. Antonia Watson spoke to RNZ's Guyon Espiner about how prepared ANZ is to weather the Covid-19 crisis.
It's a big economic challenge. I don't think it's unprecedented that we've shut the country down for 4 weeks. It's, as the Prime Minister has made very clear. Certainly our economists are forecasting GDP to have a significant impact on GDP. But I think also we should remember that we're probably in a better place in New Zealand than some other countries. We've had action by the Reserve Bank on monetary policy, and they've talked about quantitative easing, so we'll have money in the economy. The government's done a very big fiscal package, and it feels like they're signalling that there could be more. We've had the dollar fall, which helps our exporters. We've had dairy prices staying okay, and we're a long way away from the rest of the world, and we have control over our borders, and we've exercised that control at an earlier stage, I think, than we've seen other countries do. So, you know, it's not going to be pretty, but on balance, I'd rather be here than in some parts of the world.
Okay, step one for any bank. How sound is it? How sound is the ANZ right now?
Extremely sound. I think people need to have complete confidence in the banking system in New Zealand. If you think back to the GFC, where we came out in pretty good shape, actually, compared to other banks around the world, we've put in even more measures since then, mainly driven by the Reserve Bank on capital, so we're extremely well capitalised. We were on a path to become even more well capitalised, but that capital is something for a rainy day. The rainy day is here, and the Reserve Bank has acknowledged that and has put off some of those new capital requirements, but we've still got a lot of capital. Liquidity, we have a lot of money available to lend, and part of that is the outcome of the GFC and some of the measures that were put in. And we have a lot of liquidity in the system. The Governor has been very clear that, I think he said he's awash with cash and he'd love to show us into the vault to see it. But, you know, there's no concerns for New Zealanders about the safety of the banks or their ability to keep getting money.
So there will be no run on the banks in New Zealand?
Well, I can't control that, but there's absolutely no reason for there to be. The ATMs have got lots of cash in them. There is lots of cash in the system. The Reserve Bank's prepared to implement quantitative easing, so I think we're in a really, really good position as a country.
How would you compare this with the GFC?
It's different to the GFC because it's been such a sharp, sudden shock in terms of closing down the country. In terms of the economic position that we're in and the stability of the banking system, we're in a better position. I think we've got a government and regulators and banks that are very, very willing to work together. ANZ actually turned 180 yesterday. It's not something we made a huge fanfare about in the current circumstances, but we couldn't survive with 180 years without the economy of New Zealand doing well. So, you know, New Zealand's economic resilience is part of what makes us successful, and I think the partnership we've seen over the last couple of weeks between the government, the regulators and the banks has been really strong and will help us do that as well, and I think we're all willing to play our part.
Okay, one of the big concerns for many New Zealanders will be their home. It'll be their biggest asset for those who are lucky enough to have one and own their own home. What assurances can you give over mortgage payments and this so-called mortgage payment holiday? What can you tell us about how that might work? I know not all the details are there, but what can you do to tell us about that?
Absolutely, and look, that sort of response is something that we've always had available to customers. It's just that at this point in time, we feel like it's going to need to happen at scale. There will be a lot of customers who either might be out of work or might not be being paid for a period of time that need to have a pause on their mortgage repayments to give them some more cash in their lives. So whilst it's always been available, the regulator's been prepared to give us some dispensations to let us do it at scale. For example, if you go into arrears on your mortgage, usually that impacts on your credit record, and we don't really want that to happen in the current extreme circumstances. So we've worked on all that sort of thing. We're not quite ready to hit the go button. For us, it will probably be about Monday, and that will be the ability for anyone who has either their home lending or their business lending backed by a mortgage to be able to take up to 6 months deferral of both their principal and interest payments. So it gives a 6-month period to free up that cash flow that you'd otherwise have to put into your mortgage.
Does the interest continue to accumulate while I'm taking the pause?
Yes, the interest will capitalise over that period of time. I think the important thing that at the moment is that interest rates are quite low. If interest rates were back where they were in the 80s, that would have a huge impact. It will have an impact. People will pay a bit more over the course of their loan, and it will take them a bit longer to pay their loan off. Say if they defer it for 6 months, that adds 6 months to the end of the loan. But I think that's it's a really nice way of providing people certainty for the next 6 months that they will keep their homes.
Okay, who roughly would be eligible? I know you haven't got all the T's crossed and I's dotted, but do you have to have lost your job to get this 6-month mortgage pause?
It is anyone whose mortgage was not in arrears, so was already viable lending or good lending at the point in time of, let's say, the end of February when this really started to ramp up as an issue. So it's not something we'll be putting people through onerous tests for, and part of that is I don't think we need to, because as we just talked about, the interest will capitalise. It's not in your interest to take a holiday if you don't need one.
And that is Antonia Watson from ANZ speaking there to Guyon Espiner. Children's charity Kids Can is hoping it will be able to operate as an essential service during the nationwide lockdown, and says demand from schools for food supplies has risen sharply in just the last week. After the nation moved to Alert Level 3, the charity changed its policy, allowing schools to send food home to families for the first time. CEO Julie Chapman says hundreds of schools put their hand up to become a supply hub during the lockdown to support students and their families who they know will be struggling. She joins me now. Tell us, have you heard, Julie, from the government what your role will be during the lockdown?
Look, what I can tell you is we've been speaking with Ministry of Education today, and we know that using schools as a hub will probably not work because of the fact that people do need to stay home and self-isolate in this period. So what we are now doing is talking to government about how and what we could do to still get supplies through to those families and children that are in need. But the key thing here is that it obviously needs to be done safely.
So any thoughts on how you might be able to do that?
Well, I think, there's a lot of ideas and a lot of thoughts that we've got, but ultimately it's going to be up to the sort of command team as to whether we can play a part. We're certainly poised and ready to do that. We are a bulk food supplier. So if we are called upon, then we will help. One of the key messages that I want to get out to our schools tonight, though, is that if you do have any Kids Can food on site, you need to get that out and distribute it to families before midnight. Otherwise, it is likely that it will have to stay there for at least the 4 weeks of the lockdown, possibly longer if it continues.
So how much food is that then that you need to get out tonight?
Well, that depends on what schools are holding from term one. And we know that some schools have already been taking that food and sending it out to their communities, sending it home with children. And we have communicated that to schools earlier in the week that they are able to do that. but certainly now that we know that it would be unlikely that we could use schools as a hub, we're encouraging our schools to take that food now and give it out to families before midnight.
So what has the demand been like in the past week?
We opened our food portal about a week ago, and on average each term the requests are to support about 30,000 children a day across 787 schools. So far we've had 460 schools order food, and we have already exceeded the 30,000 students a day. So we expect certainly that when we come out of lockdown and we go back into the school term and schools go back, we'll be exceeding 40,000 students a day. So that is going to require huge effort from us, the community, and our partners and individuals that donate to KidsCan.
So what kind of foodstuffs have you been sending? Because it wasn't prepared food, was it? It had to be food that could be prepared at home. So what kind of stuff were you sending out in the packages?
Yeah, so our schools are able to access a range of products. So we have fruit in tins, we have baked beans, we have yogurt makers, spreads for bread, scroggin mix, a range of muesli bars, and general kind of hot meals in tins that can be heated up and prepared easily and in a safe way.
Julie, how worried are you about these kids? Because they're not going to be going to school for the next month and potentially longer. And if they normally get their one of their main meals from you at school, what are your worries here?
Yeah, we're extremely worried as a team. And as I say, we stand ready to work in any capacity that we can with government. This is going to become, this isn't about just KidsCan kids in schools. This is going to become a wider food insecurity issue across the country. I believe that we can play a part in meeting that need, but we are going to see a huge increase, and we are very worried about those students that do rely on, breakfast and lunch being provided at school.
So you're obviously hopeful that some kind of arrangement where everybody will still be safe, but this food will be able to get through. You're still hoping you can negotiate that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's what we're set up to do. We have a huge distribution warehouse. We have stock coming in. Our supply chain, we have food there right now that we get out to communities. So, we are hopeful that we can play some kind of to ensure that kids and families don't go hungry.
Thank you so much for joining us. That's Julie Chapman, who's the KidsCan CEO, and apologies for the phone line getting a bit ropey near the end of that. It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you're just joining us, we'll be with you until the top of the hour, 7 o'clock, as the country prepares to go into lockdown at 11:59pm. Today, 50 new confirmed cases or probable cases of COVID-19 were announced, bringing the total to 205. Border security is being stepped up. Now, everyone arriving in New Zealand will be screened. If they have symptoms, they will be placed in isolation facilities, which may be a hotel or a camper van. That's being paid for by the government. 5 cases are connected to Auckland's Marist College. All students and staff from that school should already be in isolation. 4 of the cases are now regarded as community transmission, and that means that health authorities don't know exactly how these people contracted their cases of COVID-19. The good news, 23 of the 205 people are fully recovered. 6 are in hospital and none have needed ICU care. We've completed about 10,000 tests now. 1,400 of those tests were processed yesterday. And the Olympics, the Tokyo Olympics, have been postponed until 2021. Small communities fear their limited resources will be pushed to their limits by city dwellers escaping to their batches during the lockdown. From midnight tonight, New Zealanders will need to stay put for 4 weeks in a bid to stop the spread of COVID-19. Reporter Susan Strongman has spoken to Coromandel Peninsula residents who are worried by the influx of out-of-towners they've seen in the last few days.
This morning, 6 cars filled with people arrived at a single beach house across the road from Pawanui real estate agent and school bus driver Peter Wilson's home. Mr Wilson worries about the pressure an increase in population will put on services in the small Coromandel town, and also worries people could bring the virus with them. It's certainly busier than usual there, he says.
Quite a few more cars outside houses than there normally is at this time during the weekday. There certainly are a few more people down here, and we just assume that they're down to do their spend their lockdown time in the beach houses down here, I would assume.
Mr Wilson says the town has only one part-time GP and the nearest hospital in Thames is just under an hour away. But he says things are okay for now.
The local supermarket's very aware of it, and they're stocking up well, and so I think there's been no panic buying from what I can see in the supermarket, so I think everything's going pretty well. It's a long way to go yet. 4 weeks is quite a while, isn't it? So we'll just have to hope that everything hangs in there.
Dr Fiona Bolden is chair of the Rural General Practice Network and works as a GP in the Coromandel beachside town of Whangamata. She too is concerned about the increase in population some small towns are faced with.
What we're seeing now, though, is that lots of people from the cities have decided to move out and do their isolation, do their 4 weeks in batches in rural. So this is really alarming to us because suddenly we've got a massive increase in the population.
Dr Bolden says rural areas are fine at the moment, but healthcare practitioners need to make sure they have the resources to manage things if they get worse.
We really, really don't want everybody coming out to rural areas to stay in batches for 4 weeks because we are having difficulty managing people who are here already, and especially if they bring COVID with them.
For those planning to self-isolate at their batch, the advice from the government's National Covid-19 response team is to get there before 11:59 p.m. Once there, people will need to stay put. They cannot travel back and forth between their home and their batch until the alert level changes. For Checkpoint, call Susan Strongman aho.
In just a little over 5 hours, New Zealand will lock down for 4 weeks. The advice from the Prime Minister is for people to act like they have COVID-19. But there's still some confusion about what people can and cannot do. Charlotte Cook joins us now from our Wellington studio to answer more of your questions. Thanks for this, Charlotte. Under COVID-19 rules, this person asks, will I be able to visit my mother who lives alone close by and is deaf with early dementia?
Yes, this is okay, as long as you are her only contact and she is your only contact outside of your household. If you don't mix with anyone, this is going to be okay. But again, I keep saying it, think of your bubble. If she is in your bubble, that is okay. Commit to your bubble. Do not cheat on your bubble.
So this is the idea that people alone can have one dedicated carer as such, as long as that carer doesn't go outside their bubble.
Yes, the bubble is the best way of thinking about it. So, yeah, keep your contacts to a minimum. The smaller the bubble, the better. But obviously we don't want people living in their houses alone because that opens up a whole other problem. And we want people to be looked after. So look at your bubble, keep your bubble safe, and yeah, just don't cheat on your bubble. This is your bubble for the month. And if we don't listen to our bubble, then this month will grow.
Okay, so any idea how shared child custody is going to be managed if parents live in different towns?
This is something, not all families live in one home anymore, and that is the reality, but the lockdown will only work to stop the spread of the virus if contact between people is limited. So if there is shared custody in the same town, then children can go between, but the adults in both households should not have contact with others outside of their household. So that's in order to limit any spread or risk to other whānau. But at level 4, travel between the regions is closed down. So except for essential travel, there is not the ability to split time in households in different towns or centres. So if you are going to have to say goodbye to your kids, now's the time, because they will need to stay with one parent for the remainder of the lockdown.
Okay, what do we know about hardware stores? If your faucet blows, can you get another one?
Yes, plumbers are considered an essential service. So any of those, emergencies in the home where you need help quickly to fix that is going to be okay. But hardware stores themselves are not considered an essential service. So someone could go to Bunnings, say a tradie that needs to pick up a supply that is essential, that is going to be okay. But if you've run out of potting mix, no, you can't go. You've missed it. So isolation and physical distancing from other people is the best thing we can do to stop the virus in its tracks. So all non-essential retail is closed.
So as Sarah Stewart-Black says, who is the Civil Defence Controller, don't be mooching around. So the plumber can go to the hardware store. You cannot.
Yes, and the plumber should only go there if the plumber has a need to be there. The whole thing is don't do what you do not need to do. This is like life essential, life necessities, critical. This is not, oh, I really wish I had one more of those.
Okay, so someone is asking, can I invite my neighbours over if we sit 2 metres apart?
No. The simple answer is no. Isolation and physical distancing, as I keep saying, from other people is the best thing we can do to stop the virus. So you can only share your space with the people you are living with your bubble. If you or your neighbour has the virus, then there's a heightened risk of that getting around your community, and then you go to the supermarket and you share it with someone at the supermarket, and that makes its way into another community. We have to break the train of transmission. So you can talk over the fence, give your neighbour a g'day, but on the phone or Skype, just not face to face. Even if you are staying at 2 metres away, the risk is not worth it.
Yeah, because someone else on the show, they got in contact with some feedback and said that a bunch of their neighbours had set up what seemed to be a communal seating area in a shared driveway. So that is an absolute no-no, just to be clear, isn't it, Charlotte? No.
A straight up big no-no. And, if you are concerned, there are authorities that will be checking on things, and, the police are still working about a fine system or what they might consider doing if people aren't following the rules. This is for everyone's best interest. So I suggest you pack up your deck chairs and you head back into your own homes before the 11:59 deadline.
Okay, so what about people who have temporary visas that are due to expire perhaps during this 4-week period?
This is something that has been a big concern, but travellers with a temporary work, student, visitor, interim and limited visa expiring before April 2020 who are unable to leave New Zealand must apply online for a new visa. A new interim visa will be issued. Travellers with a temporary visa due to expire in or between April the 1st and the 9th of July 2020 will have their visas extended to late September. Confirmation of these extensions will be emailed to all visa holders.
Just before we go, and just a quick answer here, Charlotte, what do you do if someone knocks at your door, please?
It's best to talk through the door or a window, but there shouldn't be anyone coming to your door because they should all be in isolation unless they are an essential service, so say no.
Thank you, Charlotte Cook. That's Charlotte Cook answering some of your questions. Hey, before you go, Charlotte, who's in your bubble?
Oh, I am in a bubble in a flat with my brother and 2 flatmates, so my bubble is pretty tight.
Good luck with that. Thank you so much, and for answering those questions over the next few days. We'll keep trying to answer the questions that you have. That is all we have time for this evening. Don't forget you can follow our stories online, and news bulletins will keep you up to date as we head into the lockdown. Stay home, break the chain and save lives. You may not be at work, but that doesn't mean you don't have a job. Your job is to save lives, and you can do that by staying home. That was the message today from the Prime Minister as the country prepares to go into lockdown tonight at 11:59 p.m. We are an emergency service. We will be here on air for the duration of the lockdown. Please stay tuned in for the latest information. Morning Report will be back with you tomorrow at 6 a.m. From the Checkpoint team, stay safe, look after each other, be kind.
RNZ News at 7. Good evening, I'm Susana Leatawa. The government is introducing tougher border controls, including placing people in quarantine at an approved facility. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says all those entering the country will be screened for COVID-19. Here's political reporter Charlie Drever.
Ms Ardern says if people coming into the country display symptoms, they will be tested and placed in an approved facility. Anyone not displaying symptoms but who does not have a plan or the ability to self-isolate or travel home in isolation will also be placed in isolation. Those who do not have an approved plan will be checked on by the police, and if they are not following the rules, they will be fined and quarantined. The approved facilities will include motels and hotels, as well as facilities already used in quarantine, like